Chapter 191. Hey, Carrie. What's wrong? Xiao Shang stood up and asked when he saw Carrie's high alert state. At the same time, everyone in the room took out their weapons, adjusted themselves to their best combat state, and moved towards the door. Carrie stared at the stranger in front of him with cold sweat on his forehead. This person was definitely not from the 6th Division. Carrie was very familiar with the internal personnel of the 6th Division after so many years. Whether it was the combat personnel, technical personnel, or logistics personnel, Carrie had memorized every single one of their faces. But he shouldn't be from the 3rd B Squadron either. If the 3rd B Squadron had such a person, Carrie would definitely have an impression of him. He would never forget a person he met for the first time. No breathing, no heartbeat, no sense of warmth. Other than its human appearance, there was nothing human about it at all. It was like a dead object. Carrie's eyebrows twitched. Could this be a robot the captain got from Friends? That couldn't be right. Both squads were a little scared of robots because of the betrayal of the robots. They always thought that there was a hidden danger, so they didn't want robots at all. Then what was this person in front of him? While Carrie was staring at the stranger in front of him with his entire body on high alert, Xiao Shang and the others had arrived behind Carrie. They saw that the stranger had stopped in front of the door with a warm smile on his face. He didn't look hostile at all, and he didn't look human at all. Moreover, Xiao Shang discovered that their communicators had lost contact with the outside world. There was no signal in the surroundings. What on earth happened? Who are you? Carrie asked in a deep voice. The weapons in their hands were all ready. If the person in front of them made any strange movements, they would not hesitate to attack. The person smiled warmly and raised his hand. Hello. Carrie's face twitched a little. Is this a handshake? Who would be stupid enough to shake hands with a complete stranger in a situation like this? That was why Carrie still stuck to the principle of not moving until the enemy moved. He ignored the outstretched hand of the man in front of him. The person didn't look angry at Carrie's indifference at all. He withdrew his hand with a warm smile on his face and looked very sincere. Hello, I'm Cheto. His voice was neither fast nor slow, making one feel as if they were bathing in the spring breeze. I don't care what your name is, Cheto cut in before Carrie could finish. I know who you are. Carrie, Xiao Shang, Ba Dao. Cheto looked at Carrie and the others again and said their names. Carrie and the others thought to themselves, damn, the information is quite complete. While everyone was on guard against Cheto, Cheto nodded at them and took a step toward Carrie. At the same time, a figure suddenly jumped out from behind Cheto. Walala. Just when they were highly nervous because of the attraction, a strange voice suddenly appeared. Carrie's lightsaber and Xiao Shang and the others almost fired their guns. What the fuck? Carrie felt that his heart had almost jumped out of his chest. He pointed a trembling finger at the cat head that popped out from behind Cheto and said, Wow. Carrie couldn't say anything for a long time and panted heavily. Xiao Shang and the others were almost the same. Silin, they're scared, haha. Hui Mao said smugly while standing on Cheto's shoulder. It was only when they saw Silin walking over from behind Cheto that they truly relaxed. Xiao Shang leaned against the door and looked like he was about to collapse. Fuck, I was even wondering if they were Azrael's men. As he spoke, Xiao Shang wiped the sweat off his forehead. His back was also drenched in cold sweat. What a scam. That was so scary. I thought of Azrael too, Ba Dao said while flexing his overly tense muscles. He glanced at his communicator and found that it was back to normal. Xiao Shang shook his head and said, Are you punishing us for not doing our jobs, Lieutenant Silin? Silin simply smiled at Xiao Shang's complaint before pointing at Cheto and saying, Allow me to introduce you. This is the result of my research during this time. It's an AI robot, Cheto. It really is a robot. Carrie scuttled over to take a look before circling around Cheto twice. Something's wrong with it. It gives me a different feeling than Frience's robots. I can't put my finger on it, but it just feels different. Humph. This is the result of Silin's and my research. Of course, it's not something a guy like Friends can compare to. Hui Mao said, while looking up from Cheto's shoulder. Carrie and the others curled their lips at Silin's words. You and Silin's research? Who would believe that? I'm afraid that Silin was the one doing the research while you were eating fish biscuits to the side, right? Carrie and the others were right. However, Huimao would definitely give them a good beating if they said it out loud. Truth be told, Huimao's contribution to Cheto's creation couldn't go unnoticed. If Huimao hadn't found the ideal material, Cheto's creation would have been delayed. Therefore, when Silin created Cheto, Huimao categorized Cheto as one of his own. To be specific, he was a lackey. Xiaoshang moved closer and squeezed Cheto's arm curiously. This feeling, is he really a robot? Not only could he see the blood vessels, he could even feel the fluid flowing inside them. TSK, are these blood vessels? Cheto didn't say anything. He extended a finger, and his fingernail suddenly grew long. Then he cut a 2-centimeter deep wound on his other arm. There was no blood. It looked like a normal human wound, but no blood flowed out. Then, under Carrie and the others' astonished gazes, the wound swiftly healed and returned to its original state. What the fuck? Carrie didn't know what to say right now. They had seen the rebellion between the robots at Fritz's place before. When Rank 4 and Rank 5 robots were torn apart by Rank 2 robots, they definitely didn't reveal the color of flesh and blood that Cheto's was. If Cheto could pass off the fake as the real thing, then Beaver and Fritz's robots were even more realistic. Don't treat Cheto like a robot at Fritz's place. He has developed his own intelligence. Moreover, he can adjust his body temperature and heartbeat to the same as a human's. Silin briefly introduced Cheto's characteristics. However, Carrie and the others were a little worried about Cheto's existence. Everyone in the squad would raise their hands in approval if Cheto was placed at the front, but everyone had just experienced a large-scale rebellion at Fritz's place, and they were extremely sensitive to the word robot. There were definitely a lot of people in the squad who didn't care about Cheto's existence. It was just as Carrie and the others thought. When Silin brought Cheto to Shotten and the lieutenant commanders, more than half of them voted against the idea. Shotten didn't say anything until now. He simply stared at Cheto in silence. Huimao was lying on top of Cheto's head. There were a couple of times when he almost couldn't stop himself from refuting Cheto. If Silin hadn't told him to stay silent, he would have rushed up and scratched Cheto a long time ago. You think our Cheto can't compare to your useless subordinates? If Huimao said what he thought, even Shotten would flip a table. Silin knew that Huimao wouldn't choose his words carefully when he was angry. That was why he told him to stay silent. Shotten tapped the table with his finger, and the discussion in the room came to a halt. Shotten looked at Silin and said, "Silin, how can you guarantee that he won't be like Fritz's robots? Don't tell me about the first-generation robot. No one can guarantee that it's just a test by Azrael. I'm the only one who knows the final control code. If anyone else tries to hack it, it will cause the opposite effect. This is also the improvement I made after analyzing the first-generation robot and the other generations of Fritz's robots, as well as the robots produced by the other manufacturers in the League of Stars." The others wanted to say something, but Shotten stopped them with a hand. "Are you sure something like Fritz won't happen again?" "I'm sure." Silin looked Shotten straight in the eye without backing down. "Good." Shotten looked around and said, "I agree with Cheto's existence, but due to everyone's different attitudes, Cheto can only move around within your squad's area for now." "Sure." Silin didn't care about this. Even if he agreed to move around, he wouldn't allow Cheto to leave his squad's area. After Silin and Cheto returned to the squad's area, Yudi and Beaver even stopped what they were doing and waited for them. "Did you agree?" Yudi asked. Of course. Silin was pretty confident that Shotten would agree. Lieutenant Silin, let's talk." Beaver moved closer with a chuckle and looked at Cheto. Then he faced Silin and asked, "Can we spar for a bit?" Of course Silin knew what Beaver meant. Nodding, Silin said, "Sure. You and Yudi will work together. If you can break through the first line of defense and take control of any part of Cheto's body, you win." Yudi and Beaver exchanged a glance with each other. Okay. As for this competition, because it was only a competition within the team, no one else knew about it. Inside the virtual combat room, Carrie, Yudi, and Cheto were each sitting in front of a microcomputer. They were identical, and Beaver had gotten them all. Beaver and Yudi were sitting on one side, and Cheto on the other. There was a table between them, and a projector was placed at the center of the table. All three microcomputers were connected to the projector, and it was a contest of who could control the projector first. Not far away from the table, the rest of the squad had come to watch the battle. The Miantuan was definitely on Yudi's side, but Hui Mao was on Cheto's side. Therefore, Shueqiu and Qifeng didn't say anything. They didn't choose to support either. After Cheto sat down, Hui Mao jumped onto Cheto's lap and raised his chin. It was almost as if he was saying, "Here, scratch me." Therefore, everyone saw Cheto scratch Hui Mao's chin with one hand and stroke Hui Mao's fur with the other. Hui Mao was so comfortable that he purred and narrowed his eyes. He didn't look at the battle at all. In fact, he didn't even need to look at Hui Mao to know the result. "Are you ready?" Sillin asked. "Ready." Yudi and Beaver's fingers were ready to move at the command. Cheto, on the other hand, nodded as usual with a faint smile on his face. Hui Mao once said that cats love to smile, so he told Sillin not to create facial paralysis when he was creating Cheto. On the other hand, Sillin thought that everyone in the squad was too noisy, so he wanted them to settle down a bit. That was why Cheto was unusually calm all the time. In the eyes of those who didn't know what was going on, this kind of calmness was definitely an act. Beep! Both Yudi and Beaver's fingers moved quickly after the sound. Yudo's eyes were blurred because he couldn't keep up with their movements at all. He didn't think that they had this kind of ability. No wonder Carrie said that these two were the most technologically advanced people in the entire 6B squadron. Worship. Then they looked at Cheto. Everyone was dumbfounded. Yudi and Beaver didn't have the time or heart to pay attention to Cheto's performance at all. It was because they thought that their performance would be revealed in this online contest. Both sides' movements would be visible in this online contest. If Carrie and Beaver were to split their attention to watch Cheto right now, they would definitely give up right away. Cheto was still the same as before. He was scratching Hui Mao's chin with one hand and stroking Hui Mao's hair with the other. However, even Carrie couldn't catch the moving program on the screen of the microcomputer. All he could see were a series of characters and programs flashing by. Lycrabe tried to look into Cheto's eyes, but he couldn't see anything. He still looked the same as before. Lycrabe thought that he had seen all kinds of high-end robots when he was young, but compared to the one in front of him, they were nothing but background characters. A mysterious and unfathomable robot could be guessed by a person's body movements or expression, but a robot couldn't. How on earth did Sillin create such a strange guy? Yudi and Beaver were sweating profusely, and their fingers were moving faster than before. However, it was obvious from their expressions that the situation wasn't in their favor. A glance was all it took for a layman to realize the difference between the two sides. Compared to Yudi and Beaver, Cheto was simply too relaxed. He looked like he wasn't paying attention at all. Then a holographic image slowly appeared on the projector at the center of the table. It was a very comical image. A lot of people had seen a cross made of two bones and a skull above a bone fork. The image they were seeing now was similar, but it wasn't a cross made of two bones. Instead, it was a cross made of two slender fish biscuits. Above the cross was not a skull, but a cat's head. It was Hui Mao's cat head. Yudi and Beaver had stopped what they were doing and looked at each other. They nearly vomited blood when they saw it. Is this guy going to stay like this forever? Yudi and Beaver turned to look at Carrie and the others. Everyone stole sympathetic looks at them. Yudi flexed his aching arms and fingers before smiling helplessly. It's a species advantage. Beaver was feeling the same way. He wouldn't have competed if he knew this was going to happen. At the same time, both Yudi and Beaver noticed something. Only 1 minute had passed since the beginning of the duel, and it was exactly 1 second shorter than the other. This meant that it wasn't a coincidence. Neither Yudi nor Beaver believed that it was a coincidence. This meant that Cheto had been holding back. I concede defeat. In fact, both Yudi and Beaver had tried to hack into Cheto's core control program while they were fighting for control of the projector. But forget hacking, they couldn't even find a signal connection. They had no idea how Cheto ran the program at all. Neither Yudi nor Beaver were sore losers. Moreover, they were happy that they had gained a new helper. With a guy like that, Yudi and Beaver would be working on that protective network they were working on would move even faster. Hunters relied on their strength to communicate and win respect, even if Cheto was just a robot. Everyone in this squad, be it human or non-human, possessed a certain level of ability. Even Emiantuan was a little expert in certain aspects, let alone Shuecho and the little rabbit. Diaz was very happy. Handing over his position to Silin was a wise choice. Big brother Silin, I have a question, Tang Chiochio said. Ask away. Why is he called Cheto? Did you give him that name, Big brother Silin? No, Wheeze did. At first, Silin was going to call him X, or Shadow X, but Huimao said that Shadow X sounded too bad, so he decided to call him Cheto instead. That was how Cheto was born. The first time 6th Division accepted Cheto was when he was mining on a rank D habitable planet. Maybe it was because the two squads ran out of luck at the beginning, but they didn't find anything for a long time after that. It made sense. After all, Sector U wasn't as dangerous as Sector Z, and there were still a lot of treasure hunters there. Every time someone came, they would come with the intention of picking up a treasure. It was absolutely incredible luck that they were able to discover a precious mineral deposit on that planet so soon after the exploration began. But after a period of silence, the detector finally reacted again. Although the mineral deposit this time wasn't as valuable as the previous one, the selling price was still satisfactory. Everyone was still wearing their protective suits, except for the two anomalies, Huimao and Cheto. The situation was like this. When Shotten was mining the mineral deposit, he discovered some energy blocks of good quality. However, the energy blocks happened to be located at a magnetic interference point, and coupled with the image of the geomagnetic ores, the mining machines stopped working by the time they reached the place. Shotten was determined to obtain these energy ores. After all, it wasn't easy to discover energy ores of such quality. After discussing with the lieutenant commanders, Silin contacted Cheto directly. And so, under the shocked gazes of Shotten, the lieutenant commanders, and the surrounding squad members, Cheto nimbly crawled into the mining hole, threw out the machines stuck inside, and dug out the energy ores with his bare hands. The energy blocks might not be big, but their combined weight was definitely comparable to a small spaceplane. Cheto calmly stored the energy ores into a long bag and easily dragged it out of the hole. He didn't use any machines at all. Everyone couldn't help but twitch when they saw this. Robots are so King good. Everyone in the squad was tolerant towards meritorious contributors. Moreover, Shotten was looking at Cheto like he was looking at an extremely valuable mineral deposit right now. One had to know that Cheto wasn't affected by the word machine at all. In fact, he didn't even have any side effect from the magnetic field. What a treasure, what a precious treasure. After he was done moving the energy ores, Cheto patted his clothes and returned to his previous appearance. He didn't look as messy as the others who entered the mining hole. In the following days, Cheto was accepted by more and more people in the 6th Division, and he officially established himself in the 6th team. Chapter 192. Although there weren't any delightful harvests in the latter part of the journey, it was still a rare find. Even if there was only one type of rare mineral, it would be a worthwhile trip, not to mention that there was more than one type of rare mineral in this trip. The original plan was to use 50 days to search for the minerals, but in reality, it took 60 days. This was because they found some energy ores later on. Although the quality was not good, they were still usable. Therefore, the two team leaders decided to use the energy ores to support the rest of the search and extend the search time. On the 60th day, the two team leaders gave the order to leave Sector U. They did not run into too much trouble this time. They did not run into any robbers, and although they did run into people from Heaven's Birth, everyone just greeted each other and went their separate ways. Lon Hudi still kept a low profile, and Mist and Wuxia seemed to have evaporated in a thin air once more. Everyone thought that things had calmed down for now, or this trip would not have been so easy. Silin did not think that those guys would calm down so easily. The reason they did not run into chaos might be because the conflict did not happen in this area. Perhaps a great conflict was happening somewhere in the League of Stars, while everyone thought that everything was peaceful. However, those were not what Silin was thinking about right now. If he did not have the ability, he would not have a right to speak even if he came into contact with that level. He could only be cannon fodder. Are we still going to Sector I this time? Inside the meeting room, Watcheen asked Shotten. Normally speaking, if they did not accept certain missions beforehand, they would first submit the information they found to the A Squad, and then decide the fate of these minerals through the A Squad. Usually, the A Squad would keep a portion of the minerals according to their needs, and sell the rest at a high price. This time was no exception. Shotten nodded. After discussing with Captain Falvey, the result is still to go to the City of Trade, Rare Era. The team leaders had already expected this decision, to sell these rare minerals at a satisfactory price. Going to the City of Trade, Rare Era, was the best choice. The City of Trade in the Rare Era that Shotten spoke of wasn't a place similar to an ordinary city like people thought. Although the City of Trade in the Rare Era also used the word city, it was actually much larger than the city that people spoke of. The Rare Era City of Trade was located on planet I-100 of Sector I. This planet wasn't small, and it was 5 times larger than Cylin's birthplace, planet Brown Earth. From space, planet I-100 only had one continental plate, and this continental plate occupied 70% of the planet's surface area. The rest of the area was the sea, with a few scattered islands of different sizes. The Rare Era that Shotten mentioned was the City of Trade. The entire continental plate was a city of trade, and it was the largest and most famous trading venue in Sector I. Valuable trades were taking place at every moment. The City of Trade Rare Era had a history of thousands of years. Thousands of years ago, a few merchants developed the planet's only continental plate into a trading venue, and after thousands of years of development, the present Rare Era City of Trade had become one of the wealthiest places in the League of Stars. Although this City of Trade had a long history, the truth was that the style of this city leaned towards the retro. There was no lack of ancient buildings that had a long history, and those well-preserved buildings that were filled with an ancient atmosphere were places that some of the literary researchers and artists in the League of Stars fell in love with. The City of Trade Rare Era was also the largest trading and processing place for rare minerals in Sector I. Many famous gems, enviable energy blocks, and rare materials that many forces coveted were traded out of this place. It was exactly because of this City of Trade's uniqueness that the City of Trade security was ranked near the top in the entire League of Stars. Its security measures were even more complete than some places in Sector A. Therefore, as long as a transaction of great value was done in the City of Trade, no one would come out to rob it. Of course, what would happen after leaving this planet was not the concern of the City of Trade's guards. Besides, the people who came here to trade were all capable and had a background. Ordinary robbers would not be able to rob them. This time, the two teams are going to put the precious minerals they found up for auction at the trading venue. There was no need to worry about not being able to sell the precious minerals, and many people who urgently needed these minerals would stand guard at the trading venue all day long. They would check the traded items in the entire City of Trade, and if they found something they liked or needed, they would rush to the auction venue of their own accord. The items and samples had already been submitted to the people of the Rare Era trading venue, and the auction of these precious minerals would begin 5 days later. However, these minerals would be auctioned separately and not together. If they were put together, the price would be too high, and many people would not be able to get their hands on the money at first notice. Therefore, they would be auctioned separately to give the buyers some buffer time to raise their funds. This way, they would be able to sell these precious minerals at a higher price. Planet I-100 security was very strict. Many people had to go through several layers of checks to prevent dangerous items and unknown viruses from entering the planet. This wasn't the first time Carrie had come here, but he was especially nervous this time. It wasn't because of himself, but because of the non-human behind him. The group passed through the security passage one by one. Cylin passed through the passage safely, and the Huimao on Cylin's shoulder did not trigger any alarm either. Behind Cylin, Cheto slowly walked into the passageway. Carrie and the others who had already passed through the passageway felt their hearts beating wildly. He had once seen a man with a miniature grenade who didn't repent even after he triggered the alarm inside the passageway, causing countless gun barrels and other weapons to suddenly appear around the passageway. Because the person was carrying a miniature grenade, he was frozen into an iceman by the ultra-low temperature gun that looked like a porcupine. As for guns and whatnot, as long as their attack power did not exceed the limit, they would be returned to the person who passed through the security passage after passing through the security passage. But a person like Cheto probably wouldn't be executed immediately, would he? At most, he would be given a serious warning and kicked out. It would be a lie if Sillin said he wasn't nervous. Although he was confident, he hadn't gone through an actual test like this before. That being said, Cheto was taking a certain amount of risk by coming here. As Cheto walked through the passage step by step, Sillin and the others' hearts rose and fell. No alarm went off, and the final test results still showed that he was an average human. Shotten gave Sillin a thumbs up. Not even Frunze's robots could come up with an average human, could they? Tang Qiuqiu was also clamoring to tag along. She wanted to buy some candy, and she heard that the candy here was a very rare type. Although it was very expensive, Tang Qiuqiu was willing to buy it. Qiuqiu tagged along as well. The security passage didn't classify this kind of animal as a threat. Walking on the streets of the rare era, one couldn't help but feel like they had returned to the ancient era. There were no tall buildings that reached into the clouds, and the air was filled with a strong, ancient wind. Shotten and Falvey brought a couple of people to the auction house they contacted earlier. The others had their own time to do their own thing. Sillin's group was divided into 4 groups. Tico and Lycrabe went to the medical trade centers. Carrie, Xiaoshang, Beaver, and Ba Dao went for a stroll. Carrie said that the bars here were very tasty, so he left with his group. Diaz and Asha, on the other hand, went for a world of their own. In fact, Sillin was going to go with Carrie and the others, but Tang Qiuqiu wanted to buy candy. That was why Sillin told Carrie and the others that he would look for them at the bar after he bought the candy. Cheto and Qiuqiu followed Sillin, and Chiefing as well. This was the first time Chiefing had seen an environment like this, so he was obviously very curious. Although he couldn't help but be vigilant out of habit, he was more curious than anything else. On the other hand, Cheto was constantly collecting new information, but he still looked gentle on the surface. Unlike Chiefing, he didn't reveal his curiosity and vigilance at all. Following the distribution map of the City of Trade, the group arrived at Sweet Street. This street was full of desserts, and Hui Mao was clamoring for Tang Qiuqiu to buy candy as soon as possible so that they could go to a commercial street next door that specialized in luxury pet products to buy fish biscuits. However, Tang Qiuqiu couldn't resist all kinds of candy. She bit her finger in hesitation. She really wanted to buy the entire street. Hey, Qiuqiu, hurry up. Qifeng and I still need to go to the neighboring street to buy something, Hui Mao said impatiently while crouching on Sillin's shoulder. Tang Qiuqiu ignored Hui Mao's complaints. While she was hesitating, she was suddenly attracted by a loud noise. It was a rustic shop. The flowers and plants on the windowsill were actually made of sugar. The windowsill, which looked like it was made of wood or stone, was actually made of sugar as well. Overall, it had a kind of retro and sweet style. Tang Qiuqiu wasn't attracted by the layout of the shop, but by a huge lollipop that was slowly rising above the shop. That was a free sample tasting sign. Big Brother Sillin, wait here. I'll go grab the candy. Before Sillin could say anything, Tang Qiuqiu ran over. Qiuqiu also ran over and squeezed with a group of children who were about the same age as Tang Qiuqiu. Seeing that the people who squeezed over were all children, Sillin stood aside. Only when it came to candy, Tang Qiuqiu would become like a child. There was an unwritten rule on this street that only children were allowed to grab candy, and adults weren't allowed to participate. Therefore, there were some bodyguards, nannies, parents, and the like standing on the periphery, shouting to remind them not to get stepped on. This shop was actually a small branch set up by a sugar processing factory. These various types of candy were heavily advertised. Every day, many people would submit a large number of orders because their children liked it. The candy here was very expensive. One could tell just by looking at the logo. It was considered a luxury item among the sweets. A small bag of candy was equivalent to a flying car. However, no matter how expensive it was, it couldn't stop the footsteps of the candy lovers in the League of Stars, such as Tang Qiuqiu. Just when the group of children was fighting over the candy, there was a sudden pa-pa-pa sound from not far away. Then a big ball floating in the air exploded with a loud bang, and the candy inside fell like rain. It was another free candy grab. The surrounding children all rushed over there. Silen's gaze turned over. Qiuqiu, why don't you go grab it? Silen's voice stopped abruptly because he didn't see Tang Qiuqiu and Xueqiu. It was impossible for Silen to miss them. If Tang Qiuqiu and Xueqiu gave up on the candy grab and went over, they wouldn't be able to avoid Silen's sight. How could this be? Chapter 193. Silen, Qifeng, Huimao, and Cheto had all moved their eyes away from the sound just now. In the blink of an eye, Tang Qiuqiu and Xueqiu were gone. The communicator could not be connected, and even the signal device on Tang Qiuqiu's body did not respond. Everything happened in an instant. Qifeng suddenly tensed up and turned into a highly vigilant state, the claws on his hands popping out. Qifeng, what happened? There's something strange, a very disgusting smell. Cheto, Silen said solemnly. Cheto might have moved his eyes away just now, but the monitor was still there. It just wasn't his eyes. Cheto opened his hand, and a projection appeared on his palm. It was the scene of what happened at the shop earlier. Tang Qiuqiu's figure was very obvious among the many little radishes, especially the fair fatty behind her. Then, a black shadow flashed, and Tang Qiuqiu and Xueqiu disappeared. And at that moment, there was a loud noise on the other side. Slowing down the video, Silen saw that Tang Qiuqiu and Xueqiu were wrapped up by something that looked like a tentacle. He had no idea what it was, but it should be very slippery and fast. In the end, it flashed towards one of the exits on this street. Huimao sniffed the air. There's no scent of Tang Qiuqiu and the other two. The culprit is very cunning, and the thing that took them away had the scent of sugar on it, and it blended in with the surroundings. But it can't escape my nose. Both Qifeng and Huimao could smell the scent of the thing that took Tang Qiuqiu and Xueqiu away. Without Huimao leading the way, Qifeng's reaction was stronger. The thing that could make Qifeng react like this was definitely not a normal human. Qifeng led the way, and Silen chased after them with Huimao and Cheto at the back. Cheto's search speed was incredibly fast. While he was doing so, he copied all the images captured by the surveillance equipment in the area without letting anyone else know about it. Judging from the footage, Tang Qiuqiu and the others were taken into a seemingly ordinary flying car after they left the street. Without the surveillance footage, it would have been very difficult to track them even if they could sniff out their scent at the beginning. Silen immediately rented a flying car from the automated flying car rental area and chased after him. The other party was very fast, and since there was a speed limit in this place, the other party had been driving at the highest speed possible. Moreover, he was driving very skillfully, so it was obvious that the other party was no ordinary person. Along the way, the culprit switched flying cars, and Tang Qiuqiu and the others were taken into a building. However, a different flying car flew out of the building's exit, and Tang Qiuqiu and the others were probably inside it. Under the joint pursuit of Cheto and Huimao, they finally arrived at a port. This was one of the 5 main ports in the City of Exchange. Obviously, the culprit had noticed Silen's pursuit, and they had done a lot of concealment measures after arriving here. Now it was very difficult to distinguish them from the surveillance footage and aura alone. Why did they want to capture Tang Qiuqiu and the others? Who were the ones who had captured them? This was the question that Silen couldn't answer no matter how hard he thought about it. What do we do, Silen? Should we split up and search for them first? Huimao asked. Silen didn't answer. He had calmed down and thought through some key things. They arrived at a quiet corner and fell silent for more than 10 seconds. Finally, Silen said, "No, don't split up. We may have been targeted from the beginning. The culprit must have made a thorough plan, but we won't find anything even if we investigate the candy store and the origin of that floating ball. Cheto, remember to send the situation here to Carrie and the captain. Qifeng and I will chase after them directly, or we won't make it in time." "Qifeng, follow me and don't leave my side," Silen said to Qifeng. Amen. Scarlet Wind's eyes were filled with anger and murderous intent. He unintentionally stretched out his long claws a little more, but Sillin patted them lightly before he forced himself to retract them. After all, there were too many people here. Cheto, you, and we go find the captain and the others. Sillin and Chiefing walked into the airport, while Hui Mao and Cheto drove the flying car into the airport. Chiefing followed closely behind Sillin. He didn't understand why they were doing this. Wheeze and Cheto could play an important role in tracking down the culprit. But why did they leave now? Chiefing believed in Sillin's decision, so he did as he was told, even though he was puzzled. Chiefing, this is the direction, right? Sillin asked. Chiefing nodded. He was very familiar with the smell. It was an annoying smell that couldn't be washed away even with disinfectant. Although the culprit had tried to cover it up, Chiefing could identify the direction of the smell if he spent some time. The two of them arrived at a spaceplane parking lot. There were not many people here. Scarlet Wind was about to say something when his hair suddenly stood on end. Based on his beastly instincts, he knew that there was danger here. However, his vigilance was taken away by the sudden and violent anesthesia. He swayed a few times and collapsed. Next to Scarlet Wind, Sillin was also lying on the ground. Both of them had an extremely thin needle in their bodies. This kind of needle was almost silent when it was shot out, and it was extremely fast. Other than that, the thin needle contained an extremely strong knockout drug. Even a rank A genotype would not be able to withstand it. After the duo collapsed, some people came out of the space planes one after another. No one would have thought that these space planes that seemed to come from different places and forces actually belonged to the same boss. The surroundings had been isolated at some point. There were no outsiders except for a few guards, but these guards turned a blind eye to the behavior of these people. After a brief exchange of glances, the guards left. After the people who came out of the space plane examined Sillin and Chiefing and confirmed that they were unconscious, they brought Sillin and Chiefing into the space plane. When the space plane flew up, no one noticed that at the bottom of the space plane that Sillin was brought in, there were two protrusions that seemed to be similar to the surrounding. Moreover, these two protrusions were communicating in some way without the security system of the spaceplane noticing. Not long after, these spaceplanes left the port and drove into space. In the huge spaceport, there was a starship parked. There was a symbol on the starship, which looked like a 6 that rotated clockwise by 225 degrees. But the arc of this 6 was larger and the tail was longer. If Sillin saw this symbol, he would be surprised because it was the kind of people that Shotten didn't want to contact the most. In a room on the starship, two people were having a conversation. You actually mobilized the experimentals to capture people. A man in a black suit who looked like he had just come out from a gathering said with unsuppressed anger in his tone. Opposite the man in the black suit sat a middle-aged man. At this time, the middle-aged man was looking at the information recorded on the electronic record book in his hand and was not afraid of the man in the suit's stern questioning. Raising his head, the excitement in the middle-aged man's eyes had not subsided. Caldwell, you can't imagine what kind of creature we've got. The middle-aged man pulled up a few items of data on the electronic record book and handed it to Caldwell, who had just attended a large auction. Although Caldwell was dissatisfied with the middle-aged man's actions, when he saw the data on the electronic record book, his face immediately cleared up. However, as a member of the management, he still had to maintain a proper attitude. With a straight face, he handed the electronic record book back to the middle-aged man. Shell, the higher-ups have told us many times not to cause any trouble at this time. The military has already sent a report, and there are also some discordant voices from the political groups. We still have to pay attention to our own actions. Of course I know that, but we've coincidentally encountered a rare specimen and template creature. We can't just give up, can we? This is several times better than the previous batch of experimentals. Schultz's gaze rested on the electronic record book as he looked at the test data that was sent back one after another. Which side are they from? Caldwell loosened his bow tie and asked. I've checked. They're from Vanguard Division 6. Caldwell's eyebrows were raised when he heard the words Vanguard, but he calmed down when he heard the words B Squadron. After all, the B Squadron did not need the A Squadron, and the loss of a few people from the B Squadron would not affect the A Squadron. Forget it this time. Don't make any moves during this period. If you affect the entire miracle, all your experiments will be razed to the ground. Of course, I'm aware of that. As for the matter of capturing Sillin and Chiefing, Shelt had only casually mentioned it. Besides, Chiefing was also a rare test subject for Shelt, so he did not want to report too much from the bottom of his heart. It just so happened that Caldwell was a little busy today, and there were some things that he had to pay attention to that the higher-ups had notified him of. Therefore, he did not spend any more effort on what Shelt was doing today. At this time, in a surveillance room on the starship, Sillin felt the restraints on his limbs. He did not move, nor did he open his eyes. Even his body remained in a state that one would expect when one was unconscious. The device at the side showed that he was unconscious. In truth, Sillin could have dodged the needle that would cause him to faint, but he did not because he had other considerations. The other party had a huge appetite. Not only did they take away Tang Chiochio, they seemed to have their eyes on Chifeng as well. Although Sillin had said those words to Cheto back in that corner, that wasn't his real goal. His communication with Hui Mao was far from that. Hui Mao was crouching on Sillin's shoulder, so they did not need to talk at all. They were not afraid of being monitored, and Hui Mao could communicate with Cheto through another method. Before Chifeng fainted, Sillin had secretly injected a kind of medicine into Chifeng's body. It was a medicine that Lycrave had invented, and it could resist certain strong stimulants. Moreover, Sillin had also added another medicine that would cause Chifeng to emit a kind of scent. As long as this scent was present, Sillin would be able to track down Chifeng. After the space plane had entered the starship, Chifeng and Sillin were separated. Chifeng was obviously under heavy surveillance, but Sillin was placed in a separate room. He was the only one in the room, and there were surveillance devices all around him. Chapter 194. He was surrounded by reinforced steel walls, hidden firepower devices, and surveillance equipment with no blind spots. It was obvious that the people here were monitoring Sillin very strictly. No, it should be said that the people here were monitoring their test subjects very strictly. Right now, Sillin couldn't do anything. This place was too closely monitored, and Hui Mao and Cheto needed time to gather information. Otherwise, he would be too passive. Tang Chiochio was probably being monitored like Sillin, and Shuechio and Chifeng were being watched even more closely. That being said, they probably wouldn't do anything just yet. Sillin needed to think about his next move during this time. The starship arrived at another planet in Sector I. The spaceport and orbiting satellites at the periphery of this planet had the same logo. Sillin was transferred to a space plane and flown to the planet. There was a huge research base on the planet, and Sillin was transported to one of the research bases. Here, there were some ordinary humans like Sillin imprisoned. However, these people had already been injected with certain drugs. Some of them had grown scales on their bodies, some had grown spikes, and some had wrinkles all over their bodies. When Sillin was transported to one of the surveillance rooms, one of these human test subjects went crazy due to the side effects of the drugs and slammed the walls around him. Every monitoring room was cylindrical, with a diameter of about 4 meters. 1/4 of the walls were adjusted to be transparent, so that the experimenters could see the reaction of the test subjects to the drugs, but the test subjects could not see each other. After Sillin was scanned by a scanner, he was injected with drugs and thrown into a surveillance room. The monitor outside the room displayed the number 6,915. This meant that Sillin was the 6,915th test subject of this kind of experiment. The people who dragged Sillin and Chifeng from the port of the trading center to the space plane gave Sillin a very strong feeling. The few people who came into contact with Sillin had detected that their genes were different from a normal person's. They weren't pure human genes, and there were more or less genes of other races in them. Moreover, these people did not speak from the beginning to the end, only following orders. Just like a puppet, these people left after sending Sillin over. The people walking inside were all scientists in white overalls. The drug injected into Sillin's body was immediately analyzed by Sillin. It was a drug to test his resistance and tolerance. The experimenters wanted to see how much he could endure. Sillin knew that the entire monitoring room was a lab table. The moment he was thrown in, the experiment had begun. Since you want to see it, in a room not far from here, a monitor reflected the situation of each experiment table, and each experimental subject's reaction to the drug would be analyzed by the relevant equipment. One of the experimenters looked at the monitor and exclaimed in surprise. Test subject 6,915's body temperature is abnormal. It's dropping rapidly after being heated up. That's impossible. The people in here all have A-rank genes. How can this one not even last 5 minutes? Another experimenter said. The data shows that his body temperature is dropping rapidly and has already reached the critical point. If it goes any lower, this test subject will be useless. Something's wrong. His body temperature is rising again. There's a strong rejection reaction. His blood flow is increasing, and his heart is beating rapidly. In the monitor, Cylin had already begun to twitch. The various data displayed on the monitoring device for Cylin was changing violently. This meant that the monitoring subject's various vital signs were extremely unstable, and the entire internal system was in chaos. The experimenters had already predicted what would happen next. 10 seconds later, the device showed that his heart had stopped beating. Half an hour later, it was still the same. That's enough. Just get rid of him, one of the researchers said expressionlessly. They had seen this kind of thing many times in this place. How's the blood test for 6,915? All the DNA has been broken down. We don't know why, but it might be the effect of the drug. A-rank genes are troublesome. All sorts of situations can happen, one of the experimenters muttered. There's no other way. The test subjects must be A-rank genes. But isn't this guy too weak? Even the kid from last time was more capable than him, and he still managed to hold on for an hour. All in all, this A-rank gene test subject is a piece of trash. I really don't know where Shell got him from. Cylin, who was lying there quietly without any signs of life, was put into a long bag and transported out of this area to a waste treatment plant. This waste treatment plant was divided into 2 treatment boxes. One was used to deal with experimental equipment and related drugs, and the other was used to deal with failed test subjects. One of the experimenters dragged Cylin from the transport rack to the table in front of the treatment box. Just as he was about to press the treatment button, a hand suddenly reached out from the bag with a thin needle in it. Before the experimenter could react, the thin needle had already been inserted into the back of his head. The needle was previously hidden in the ring with a curly leaf pattern, so the scanning device had not detected it. The drug on the needle quickly entered the experimenter's brain through the blood, and the brain nerves began to be affected by this drug. Cylin opened the bag and stood in front of the experimenter. His voice became low and slow, and there was a certain rhythm and bewitchment in it. Remember, you've already disposed of the dead. The experimenter's eyes were unfocused as he repeated Cylin's words blankly. I've already disposed of the dead. So, now go out, find a place to sleep, and start your new job. Sleep, start my new job. After watching the experimenter walk out of the treatment plant, Cylin pressed the button next to the table in front of the treatment box. The table entered the treatment box, and a white light flashed from inside. The entire bag was instantly reduced to dust, and the table returned to its original position after the treatment was done. Cylin looked up at the monitors above the treatment plant, but he did not avoid them. Instead, he asked, Have you finished processing the footage? It's done. I guarantee that no one will find out. Huimao walked in from outside with Cheto behind him. Cheto projected light from his eyes and formed many images in front of him. He cut out a portion of the footage related to Tang Xiuqiu, Xueqiu, and Qi Feng and played it back to Cheto. Miracle Corporation. Cylin looked a little surprised when he saw the logo. There were a lot of base companies that conducted biochemical or genetic experiments, but very few of them were like Miracle Corporation. Miracle Corporation's backer was very strong. Not only were they supported by business organizations, political organizations, and even the League of Stars' military. A company like this was something that no hunter regiment would want to come into contact with. It was because their background was enough to know that they were involved in a lot of shady transactions and experiments. As a member of the 4 great hunter regiments, a simple analysis was enough to understand why no one wanted to come into contact with Miracle Corporation. There was a dividing line between hunters, political organizations, and the military. It was a balance of non-interference, and on both sides of this point of balance, both sides would sneer at each other. Everyone knew each other's background and the dirty things that were going on behind their backs, and they just kept their mouths shut. With such a deep background, it was easy to imagine just how high the company's profits were. Even if their experiments were illegal and shameful, Miracle Corporation could still create a bright side for the company. Miracle Corporation's high-end biochemical weapons and genetic drugs were famous in the League of Stars. Many people knew about these two things, and it was said that Miracle's genetic drug had the highest success rate in the entire League of Stars. At the same time, it was also the most expensive drug. But under the glorious image of this drug with the highest success rate, how many innocent people had to pay with their lives? Shueqiu and Qifeng were sent to the other side of the base, but Tang Qiuqiu isn't far from where you were locked up, Hui Mao said while staring at the images. The gray cat stared at the images and said, "But Silin, we discovered that there's another group of people here. We discovered them when we were copying some of the base's surveillance footage. Although they're very well hidden, they still can't escape my cat eyes." "Do you know which side they are from?" Hui Mao shook his head. "I don't know. But you said before that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. We can work together. Don't make contact with them for now. We'll decide after we find Qiuqiu and the others. These people must have their reasons for not making a move all this time." Rescuing Tang Qiuqiu was easy enough, and Hui Mao and Cheto could take care of the security system as well. However, rescuing Tang Qiuqiu would definitely alert the enemy, and it wouldn't be as easy to deal with Qifeng and Shueqiu on the other side of the base. Judging from the images Cheto provided, the place where Qifeng and Shueqiu were being held was even more heavily guarded. While Silin was deep in thought, Cheto suddenly said, "There's a non-member of the base at the entrance of the passage 500 meters away. He's copying the footage here. I'll go over and take a look first. You guys keep an eye on Tang Qiuqiu's situation and cut off all the power systems in this area if you notice anything amiss." "Is it difficult?" "No," Cheto and Hui Mao said in unison. If it were anyone else, they would probably laugh at them for overestimating themselves, but it wasn't impossible for Cheto and Hui Mao to do so. Silin snuck over to the place Cheto pointed out. Thanks to Cheto's help, Silin didn't encounter any obstacles along the way, and he was able to pass through without needing to verify his identity. When he arrived at the passage, Silin saw the person on the other side. The person looked similar to the researchers he saw earlier. He was wearing white work clothes and gloves, and his back was facing Silin. He was fiddling with a medicine rack, and it looked like he was preparing to transport the medicine to the processing box. However, a couple of medicine boxes had fallen to the ground, and he was picking them up right now. He didn't sense any nervousness or urgency. He was very calm, and he looked just like any other researcher in this base. As Silin approached, the person still didn't show any nervousness or killing intent. Silin didn't stop after he got close to the person. Instead, he continued to walk forward, and the person was still crouching and sorting out the medicine boxes that had fallen to the ground. Silin took a few more steps after he passed by the person. Suddenly, he came to a stop and turned around, saying, "Hey, did you know that these two dangerous medicines are usually transported by robots?" Chapter 195. Silin had just finished speaking when 3 pill box fragments shot straight at him. They were aimed at Silin's eyes, heart, and kidneys respectively. At the same time the 3 fragments shot towards him, the person had already arrived. In the eyes of an ordinary person, they wouldn't even be able to see an afterimage. Silin was already prepared when he said those words. It was just that this person gave him a very familiar feeling. After dodging the 3 fragments, Silin raised his hand to block the fist that was coming at him. The moment his hand and the fist came into contact, Silin immediately knew who the person in front of him was. Knight! The person in front of him was about to continue his attack, but was stopped by this voice. Knight swiftly retreated to 10 meters away and stared at Silin warily. He didn't recognize Silin. After all, Silin's appearance was too different from when he was at Seven Lights. "Who are you?" Knight's silent stinger was already at the ready when he asked the question. As long as the person wasn't one of his own, he would attack immediately. Knight's reaction was understandable. He remembered everyone who came here with him very well, and he could recognize them even if they were in disguise. But this person in front of him, Knight was sure that he didn't know the person when they first met, but he felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity after the first exchange. Now it seemed that the familiarity grew stronger the further he looked, but there was no such person in his memories. Moreover, the person in front of him didn't have any malicious intent, and the way he looked at him was like someone who was extremely familiar with him. Who is this person? Knight was conflicted. Sillin let out a low chuckle. I knew you wouldn't recognize me. It was at this moment Hui Mao jumped out. Hey Sillin, what's going on? Something's wrong over there. Should we start a power cut? The moment he heard the name, Sillin, the corner of Knight's eyes twitched. Then his eyes slowly widened and stared at Sillin. He froze on the spot, as if he didn't know how to react. Sillin walked around Knight and looked at the display on Cheto's hand. In the video, a few researchers had already entered the room where Tang Kakikyu was locked up, and they were holding syringes and tubes in their hands. Just as Sillin was about to speak, Knight came over with a dark expression. Don't worry, we have people there. As he spoke, Knight tapped a small disc in his hand a few times. That was the code used by their operation team to communicate with each other. Sillin nodded, indicating that there was no need to cut off the power. Let's observe the situation first. Seeing how Sillin believed him so easily, Hui Mao tilted his head and looked at Knight. Who's this enemy's enemy? Just like Lung, my roommate back then, Nat Hui Mao's eyes lit up when he heard that it was the same as Lung. He jumped over and patted Knight's body with his paw. Oh, so it's one of us. Why was there a cat here? Knight moved his gaze backward and looked at Cheto. And who is this? Before Sillin could answer, Hui Mao cut in. His name is Cheto. We're on the same team. Cheto? I thought of Shadow X. Sillin looked at Hui Mao. See, I told you Shadow X was a good name. Knight raised his fist and pressed it against Sillin's head. Good my ass. How dare you say that, you bastard? If it wasn't for the environment and the situation, Knight would have beaten him up a long time ago. Back then, Sillin's method of leaving had pissed him off for more than 10 days. Even now, he still had to vent that anger. After this incident was over, he would definitely beat up this cunning bastard. He knew that this bastard was infuriating from the first time he met him. You guys tampered with the surveillance cameras, didn't you? Knight asked. Although it was a question, his words were very certain. Tampering with the surveillance cameras in this place wasn't something an ordinary person could do. Not even their operation team could do it. At most, they could duplicate the surveillance footage. Knight had a palm-sized device in his hand. With this device, they didn't need to go to the guardhouse to duplicate the recordings of all the surveillance cameras within a 500-meter radius. But they didn't expect Sillin's group to be even more amazing. They could even tamper with the surveillance footage of this area. One had to know that Miracle's surveillance network was very high-end. Why are you guys here? Sillin asked. You know a bit about Miracle's background, don't you? They've gone too far in the past few years, and there are people above us who can't stand it. Moreover, a couple of Miracle's backstage people have fallen recently, and someone wants to perform a major surgery on Miracle. That's why we accepted the mission and came here to collect evidence. They didn't know it before they came here, but not a single one of them could calm down after they saw what had happened. In the past, most of the experiments they saw were conducted on animals. But in this place, it was basically all humans, and the animals were all very rare and precious beasts. As for the experimental subjects, from the undifferentiated embryos to people of all ages, they were all subjected to extremely cruel treatment. The experimenters didn't care about their lives. If they could exchange it for a considerable amount of data, they wouldn't hesitate to sacrifice a few lives, dozens of lives, or even thousands of innocent lives. If they couldn't find any volunteers, they would rob or kidnap them. They had once seen a newborn baby bleed to death because of the metabolic disorder caused by the injection of a drug. It was then thrown away like garbage by the experimenters. Later, they killed 2 experimenters, and 2 of their companions disguised themselves as the 2 experimenters. The person who was injecting Tang Kakikyu was one of his companions. Sillin, did you know? Back then, I had always admired those researchers because of CI, Jinsheng, and Old MO. But after seeing these people, I feel that these people should be exterminated. At the same time, Tang Xiuqiu was locked in a cylindrical room similar to the surveillance room Silin was locked in. The people locked here were all young children, and most of them were kidnapped. The experimental subject is showing signs of waking up, but her mobility hasn't recovered yet. Continue injecting the drug. Tang Xiuqiu listened to the unfamiliar voices around her. She opened her eyes and saw a few people in white work clothes. One of them was holding a syringe and a tube, while the other two were adjusting the equipment. They actually brought a non-orang child here this time. But this child's resistance to drugs is pretty good, so she should be a good experimental subject. Tang Xiuqiu wanted to move, but found that she had lost control of all her muscles, and even breathing was a bit difficult. Now, Tang Xiuqiu's vision was very clear. Although she couldn't move, her mind was very clear. She didn't scream after seeing the unfamiliar environment around her. Instead, she stayed silent. Silin told her that the more dangerous the situation was, the calmer she should be. But after all, she was a child. When she saw the syringe, she tried her best to move her arm away, but she still couldn't move. The person who injected her pierced the syringe into her arm and injected the red liquid inside. She could feel that the liquid began to flow to all parts of her body. However, to Tang Xiuqiu's confusion, when she looked up, she saw the experimenter who injected her winking at her. There was a smile in his eyes, but it wasn't evil, more like a kind of encouragement. Not long after the experimenters left, Tang Xiuqiu began to feel allergic all over her body. Her body temperature rose sharply, and it didn't take long for her heart to stop beating. An experimenter looked at the data displayed on the monitor and sneered, "Tisk, garbage genes are garbage genes." Sure enough, children who don't have A-rank genes have better effects. Hurry up and dispose of it, don't waste the drug. So, Tang Xiuqiu, like Silin, was sent to the waste disposal site as a failed experimental subject. This time, Silin's actions were even faster. He still used hypnosis on the experimenters who sent the failed products. He didn't want to make a scene just yet. Perhaps these people would remember some fragments in the near future, but by then, it would be in the past, and it would be useless to remember. Silin opened the bag, and Knight injected another drug into Tang Xiuqiu. A few seconds later, Tang Xiuqiu's heart began to beat again, and then all her vital signs began to recover. "Big brother Silin, they took Xiuqiu away," Tang Xiuqiu said with red eyes. It was all because of her gluttony that things had become like this. After knowing that Qifeng was also taken away, Tang Xiuqiu felt even more guilty. Silin rubbed Tang Xiuqiu's head. "This isn't your fault. They had their eyes on Xiuqiu for a long time. Even if they didn't take it now, they would have taken it in the future. They took my gun and my badge. It's fine, we'll just take it back." As he said that, Silin looked at Knight. "Do you have more guns?" When people in the military moved, their equipment was definitely customized according to the mission, and it was much easier to move around here with specially made guns. Knight directly threw his own gun to Silin, but he didn't expect Silin to give it to Tang Xiuqiu. However, Knight only raised his eyebrows and said nothing. Although he didn't understand why a gun was given to a child, it wasn't the time to argue about it. "I'll bring you to our current base, and we'll discuss the next step of the plan there. The key research lab over at the base isn't easy to enter, and there's nothing we can do even if we're in a hurry. We haven't made any substantial progress after so long. But the good news is that according to the information we received, due to the lack of a certain reagent, the research on the beast has been suspended. We have at least 30 hours. After 30 hours, the reagent they bought will be delivered here. Once the reagent arrives, your two companions will be injected with the drug, and they'll basically be puppets. Those who can't become puppets will be directly obliterated. 30 hours. Time was of the essence. Knight brought Silin and the others to a small room in the base. It wasn't a remote area at the edge of the base, but a dormitory for technical staff. The researcher who originally lived here had been killed by Knight and the others, and one of them took over the identity of the researcher. However, there was no lack of talents in the military to be able to take over someone's identity without revealing any flaws. When Scylla arrived, he unexpectedly saw two familiar people. Although they hadn't seen each other for 3 years, and these people had also disguised themselves, Scylla still recognized them at first glance. Yulu Feng Haichao, long time no see. Chapter 196. When night brought Scylla and the others over, the lab was busy, so there was basically no one at the staff dormitory. It was fine as long as they could avoid the surveillance cameras. As for the surveillance cameras, it wasn't difficult with Hui Mao and Cheto around. It was also because the lab was busy that Yulu and Feng Haichao were the only ones in the room. The others were collecting information at various places. Yulu and Feng Haichao thought that they were rescuers when they saw Night bringing them in, but they quickly dismissed the thought. With their eyesight, there was no way they couldn't tell the difference between an experimental subject and an outsider. But after they heard Scylla's words, their wariness turned into surprise and doubt. They believed that Night wouldn't do something so stupid as to dig up their secrets without permission. But who in the world was this person who saw through their secrets with a single glance? Yulu, who was playing with his gun on the bed, sat up. The gun that had disintegrated into parts in midair became whole again when it landed in his hand. Tang Qiuqiu's red eyes flashed when she saw Yulu's move. At first, Night was thinking about how to introduce Scylla. After all, Scylla was dead back then. He didn't expect Scylla to expose himself. This was fine. Only when both sides knew each other's background would they be able to cooperate better. Although this operation to search for evidence was classified, it wouldn't be classified anymore after the incident was successfully concluded. The public would be able to guess some things from the media. After Night's explanation, Yulu and Feng Haichao only sighed for a moment. They weren't too surprised by Scylla's resurrection. That's why Yulu said back then that someone like Scylla wouldn't die so easily. Feng Haichao smiled. Night was conflicted. Why was he the only idiot who thought that Scylla was dead? No, wait, there was also Long. Both of them had idiotic thinking, but it couldn't be helped. At the time, they had witnessed Scylla's assassination. He was shot through by a bullet in front of so many people and bled so much. Not even the instruments could detect any signs of life. It was hard not to believe it. Hearing their conversation, Tang Qiuqiu bit her finger. Are you guys talking about the time Scylla was shot at 7 lights back then? Night and the other two looked at Tang Qiuqiu at the same time with inquiring eyes. Tang Qiuqiu continued to bite her finger, but she didn't say anything. Scylla rubbed Tang Qiuqiu's head. She was the one who copied the gun. The mouths of Nat and the other two formed an O shape. Looking at the gun in Tang Qiuqiu's hand, Night came to a realization. If she had such skills, it was no wonder Scylla gave her the gun. It seems like we have 2 sharpshooters here, Feng Haichao said. Tang Qiuqiu looked at Yulu. When she saw Yulu playing with a gun, she knew that his marksmanship was very good. It wasn't because of the way he played with the gun, but because of the way he looked at the gun. It was obvious that Yulu was very interested in this young sharpshooter. If there's a chance, let's compete. Okay. During this time, Scylla discussed their next operation plan with them. With Cheto and Hui Mao's help and Night's cooperation, things should be a lot easier. The reinforcements should be arriving soon, and the evidence we've gathered is almost there. When the time comes, we'll be able to send a message to the reinforcements, Night said. As long as we follow this plan, everyone will be able to retreat in one piece. Feng Haichao nodded. While they were talking, another person entered the room. Scylla didn't know this person. Luther, you're back. Night introduced Scylla and the others to Luther. He emphasized that Scylla and the others were trying to rescue their companions, and that Scylla and Night were old acquaintances. Luther only nodded expressionlessly. Scylla wasn't angry at Luther's reaction. It was because Luther was shrouded in a dark aura right now, and it was obvious that he was in a bad mood. Considering his cautious personality, he didn't even ask about Scylla's background. What's wrong? Feng Haichao asked. Luther exhaled heavily. Don't count on the reinforcements. They won't make it in time, and it'll take them at least 40 to 50 hours to get here. 40 to 50 hours. A new batch of exotic beast puppets would have appeared by then. Then what the fuck is the point of fighting? Night immediately swore when he heard Luther's words. Come to think of it, there were so many reinforcements. Even if they didn't let Miracle know what they were planning, with so many old foxes in Miracle's management, they would definitely create some trouble just in case and obstruct them. Plus, the voices in the army weren't unified, so after going around in circles, they might not be able to rush over even if they were all wiped out. Crouching on Silen's shoulder, Hui Mao's tail wagged intermittently. He didn't look worried, but he seemed to be thinking about something. Hearing that there was no reinforcements, he glanced at Silen and looked down again. How could Hui Mao's little movements escape Silen's eyes? After spending so much time together, he knew what kind of sh*t this cat was going to take as soon as it wagged its tail. Stroking Hui Mao's ears, Silen told it to use that method if there was no other way. Hui Mao couldn't hold back its excitement. It meowed and rubbed its face against Silen's face. Knight's face twitched. Mother *Cur, what kind of situation is this? And you're still acting like a master and servant. When the members of the team returned, Tang Qiuqiu met the person who injected him. It was one of the members of the operation team, Ruo Lin. Thank you, big brother. I'll treat you to some candy when we get out. Ruo Lin pinched Tang Qiuqiu's face with a smile. Sure. Knowing that there would be no reinforcements, the operation became much more difficult. Schultz's experimental subjects are very strong. It's useless even if you shoot them in the heart. You can only hit their heads. Those puppets no longer have their own thoughts and only listen to their master. Knight explained the situation at the base to Silen. They could still tamper with the defense system a little, but those puppets were too difficult to deal with. Those people were originally A-rank genotypes, and they became even stronger after being modified. The guards in the base were basically these modified humans, and some of these modified humans would be sold at a high price after being modified. Whether it was assassination, bodyguard, or combat, these people were all very good choices. But it was different for Knight's group. After all, there were only 10 of them, and even with Silen's group, they weren't confident that they could escape. Without reinforcements, they would all die here unless they stopped the mission and hid here until reinforcements arrived. But if they did that, they would miss out on important evidence, and it would also give the people of Miracle time to whitewash it. It would be difficult to find an opportunity then. Time waited for no man. Seeing that they still hadn't come up with a good plan, Silen said, I have an idea, but it'll cause a lot of commotion when the time comes. What idea? Tell me first. Knight asked Silen. Silen took out a round ball about the size of an egg. There are thousands of parasite eggs inside. These are a type of parasite called brain devouring. They will feed on the host's brain during parasitism in order to satisfy their own growth needs. All 10 people's faces twitched without exception. Vanguard Division 6? You're that person, Roland exclaimed. Knight only said that Silen was a hunter of one of Vanguard's B squadrons. He didn't elaborate on the specifics, nor did he mention which B squadron he was from. But speaking of parasites, Roland recalled a piece of news he had heard before. Roland continued, Someone told me about eliminating Poison Fong and killing Skeleton King back then. Knight and the others looked at Silen in a flash. So it's you. The A Squadron of Vanguard had covered up the fact that they had eliminated Poison Fong back then and did not reveal who it was. Not many people knew that it was the 6th Division who did it, but there were still some people who knew part of the truth. Skeleton King had died a terrible death. They had seen images of Skeleton King through certain channels, and it was no surprise that their blood ran cold. They also knew that the main cause of Skeleton King and Poison Fong's demise was parasites. They never knew that parasites could be as powerful as biological weapons or high-energy weapons. Now that they saw the egg in Silen's hand, all 10 people took a step back in unison. How are you going to guarantee that these parasites won't attack us? Knight swallowed and asked. Silen took out another box of pills and tossed it to Knight. These pills will keep these parasites away from you. Although Knight believed in Silen, the others were still skeptical. Roland, on the other hand, was more excited than the others. He hadn't been satisfied when he heard that person's story, but now he finally had the chance to experience it himself. Those who knew herbalism examined the pills Silen gave them and proved that they would not harm the human body. Moreover, the effects of the pills were limited. After this time, The pills would break down in the body and be excreted as bodily fluids or metabolites. The duration is 50 hours. There aren't many people here, so there are 30 pills. Everyone should bring 2 pills just in case. We'll talk about it again if there's a special situation. Scylla took back the pills and said, "That's fine, but you must first prove that this pill is effective." Someone said, "Then let's find 2 people and try it." And so, Luther knocked out a researcher, brought him back, gagged him, and locked him inside a small bedroom. Knight was also inside the bedroom. This was Knight's own initiative. After he swallowed a pill, he crossed his arms and leaned against the wall of the bedroom. There were 3 insect eggs in the bedroom. After they hatched, 3 little fellows the size of ants crawled out. After a brief pause, they crawled straight towards the researcher. The insect egg beside Knight crawled away like a mouse that saw a cat after it hatched. It crawled straight towards the researcher on the other side of the bedroom. Knight in the bedroom and the operation team members outside the bedroom heaved a sigh of relief. Then they stared closely at the unconscious researcher. 10 minutes later, the researcher began to twitch. The veins on his forehead bulged and his breathing quickened. Half an hour later, the researcher's face turned green and bloodless. His breathing slowed down and his body spasmed. Knight touched his forehead. It was covered in cold sweat. Chapter 197. The parasitized researcher's face turned from red to white and then green. In the end, blood splattered everywhere as the parasites burst out of his skull. The splattered blood was not bright red, but black and viscous. It solidified not long after it splashed out. This blood is all contaminated. The toxins secreted by the parasites can flow to every part of the body through blood circulation. This is a side effect of the brain being devoured. Scylla explained the image of the parasites entering a human's body. Scylla's tone was calm, but the rest of the group felt chills running down their spines. They had faced alien beasts dozens of times larger than humans, fought through bullets, and brushed shoulders with death many times before, but they couldn't help but shudder at the sight of these parasites. They couldn't help but feel like their brains were reacting to them. After taking care of the 3 multi-legged parasites, Knight sighed emotionally. Too fast. They're growing too fast. In just half an hour, these parasites had grown from the size of ants to the size of a palm. It had to be said that these guys' growth rate was astonishing. The reason they could grow so fast was because Scylla had thought about the parasite's genes. It was similar to the 2 parasites he had used to eliminate poison fawn. They were all injected with lethal genes, and there was a critical point. When these parasites grew to a certain stage, these lethal genes would activate and cause them to undergo programmed death. However, these brain-devouring parasites could not reproduce. They did not exist naturally, but were born in the workshop Engie had left for Scylla. Scylla did not want a species invasion to happen in the future, so he did not give these parasites the ability to reproduce when he created them. Sometimes, Scylla thought that he was actually not much different from the researchers at the Miracle Research Base. They were cold-blooded enough. Back then, when he watched the poison fong people on the entire planet slowly die in fear, his calm mind allowed him to realize that he was capable of numbing himself. Selfishness was innate in humans. Treat yourself well, treat people you know well, and walk your own path. That was all. I admit that these parasites are a great threat, but that's only against the defenseless researchers. What would happen to the puppets? What would happen to the puppet beasts? Someone asked. It's simple. We just need to catch one and experiment on it, Luther said expressionlessly. There's not enough time, Knight said. There's no time for special experiments. Then let's make a few plans now and change them according to the situation while we're experimenting, Yulu said. Scylla agreed with Yulu. Right now, he needed to save Shuecho and Chiefing as soon as possible. Create chaos. Most of the puppets in this base are puppets, while the rest are researchers. As for the other guards, as long as the puppets are in chaos, the guards will naturally deal with the puppets first. There's no need for us to do anything. You'll be able to gather more information in the chaos, and I'll be able to rescue my friends. After thinking for a while, the 11 of them gathered together to discuss countermeasures. Tang Chiochio and Cheto stood at the side. Tang Xiuqiu's attention was originally on Silin's group and listening to their discussion on how to save Xiuqiu and Qifeng. However, her gaze suddenly swept to Hui Mao. Right now, the cat was wearing a strange expression on its face. Crouching on Silin's shoulder, Hui Mao thought about how to create chaos and eat some experimental alien beast that hadn't been injected with the drug yet. Judging from the information they gathered, these beasts were of good quality and should taste good. Hiss, it's been a long time since I've eaten something like that. An hour later, while disguised as a technician, Roland and another team member carried the 2 parasite eggs Silin had given him and headed towards the important research area. Although they had to go through multiple identity checks and scans, Cheto was accompanying them. Earlier, Cheto had hacked into the system to check the information of the researcher whose head had been blown off by the parasite. His iris, fingerprint, and genetic information were all there, so he didn't need to put on any makeup to disguise himself. After putting on his work uniform, he led the way not far away from Roland and the others. Be it the access control or the scanning system, Cheto and the others ignored them. The door opened automatically, and the scanning system didn't sound any alarm. Like before, Silin and the others were still inside the staff dormitory and watching the situation on the monitor. Their movements were all displayed on the monitor, and they had even drawn out a detailed layout of the area at the same time. They didn't go deep into the area. Instead, they quietly planted 2 parasite eggs on the bodies of 2 puppets that were guarding the edge of the area. Then, they stood guard at the corner. From the monitor Cheto had replicated beside the passageway, they could see the 2 parasite eggs hatching on the puppets' bodies. Then, the 2 parasites quickly burrowed into the puppets' bodies. Those parasites look very excited. The puppets are much more attractive to them than normal researchers, Silin said while looking at the monitor. This was without a doubt good news. Although the puppets had lost their sense of pain, their control over their brains was much simpler. Moreover, they had been modified and strengthened. This kind of brain environment was exactly what the parasites liked the most. It didn't take long for the 2 puppets' facial muscles to start twitching, but their eyes hadn't changed at all. They were empty, numb, and emotionless. Moreover, they could no longer feel pain. 10 minutes later, the meridians on the puppets' faces started bulging, and they added an extra layer of savagery to the puppets. Moreover, the puppets' eyes were starting to turn red. A drop of dark red blood seeped out of the puppets' eyes and slid down their dissatisfied meridians. Then a second drop, a third drop. The puppets weren't as rigid as they used to be. Their arms were trembling, and their heads were shaking slightly, as if they were struggling with some kind of mental struggle. Suddenly, one of the puppets threw a punch at the other puppet and sent it flying. However, the puppet crawled back to its feet after falling to the ground, and the dark red blood in its eyes flowed faster and faster. The blood that fell to the ground quickly solidified and gave off a pungent smell. Cheto was controlling the defense system so that it couldn't activate the alarm because of this. Silin's eyes lit up when he saw the analysis data Cheto sent over. The blood of the infected puppets contains a volatile gas. If inhaled too much of it, it will cause a person to faint, foam at the mouth, lose consciousness, and even suffer severe brain contusion. Roland and the other team member had already put on a protective mask at Cheto's suggestion, but they were a little puzzled when they saw that Cheto wasn't wearing any protective measures at all. However, they didn't ask any more questions after giving it some thought. There were a lot of strange people in this world, and the one in front of them was probably one of them. What they didn't know was that Cheto wasn't a human, but a robot. Execute Plan B. As the operation team, Knight ordered everyone to split up and begin the operation. Meanwhile, Silin, Tang Xiuqiu, and Hui Mao also began the next step of the operation. Inside the key laboratory, Shelt was smiling very happily as he watched Xiuqiu and Qifeng locked inside the monitoring room. The electronic notebook in his hand was refreshing one line after another. Although the drugs hadn't arrived yet, the initial resistance test showed that these 2 test subjects were excellent test subjects. They were much better than the 1,000 or so animal test subjects before them. The white animal's genes were very complicated. At the very least, Shelt had never seen such a genetic organism before. The complicated, multi-strand helix made this fellow who looked like a pet bear look very different from the other experimental beasts. As for the half-beastman who had both human and canine genes, Shelt was preparing a different kind of drug to stimulate both genes. He didn't know whether the human gene or the canine gene was the dominant factor. Other than that, he could also extract strengthening substances from these two test subjects. However, it would probably be difficult to use a knife on a human. It would seem that he would have to find a new batch of test subjects after the drugs were delivered. Just as Shelt was planning in his heart, an alarm suddenly rang. A source of contamination has appeared in the XR area. Initial inspection shows that it was brought in by modified test subjects. Shelt was thinking about the two new test subjects when he heard the AI system's report. He frowned a little annoyed at the sudden interruption. As expected, modified test subjects were useless things that only spoiled things. Not only did they not strengthen their abilities by much, they even brought in a source of contamination. Without looking at the specific effects, Shelt said directly, "AI, get rid of them." The laboratory in this area was controlled by a common AI system, and the only person controlling this AI system was Shelt. Shelt had always been conceited. He wouldn't think that someone had tampered with the puppets, nor would he believe that his AI system assistant would be blind. "All right," the AI system named AI replied. Her voice was soothing and gentle, and it calmed down a lot of people's agitation. At the same time, the two puppets who were fighting until black blood splattered everywhere were frozen into solid ice by an ultra-low temperature freezing gun that appeared on the wall. Then, a sonic gun shot through and turned the two bodies of ice into ice powder. However, the gas in the air didn't react at all. This was the result of Cheto's work. At this time, Knight and his team members were carrying some insect eggs as they snuck into the research base in the important area step by step. Knight placed a small ice cube at a corner. When the ice cube melted, the insect eggs inside would be exposed, and a large number of parasites would hatch soon after. Silin told Hui Mao and Tang Qiuqiu to stay together while he went another way. He checked the time. Everyone should be ready already, so it was time to move on to the next step. Cheto began. Cheto, who was approaching the core of the research base, received the message and looked at a monitor. Every monitor was a part of the AI system. Cheto would be able to interfere with the entire AI system by attacking a small part of it. The battlefield of electronic networks belonged to Cheto by nature. He might not be as powerful as Hui Mao, but he wasn't any weaker than the current Hui Mao when it came to electronic systems. Right now, Hui Mao was lacking in experience. Compared to him, the Cheto created by Silin was much more cautious. Every step he took was precise to the extreme and left no hidden dangers behind. The alarm inside the important research base rang again. The AI system's voice said, "Source of contamination discovered. Puppets out of control." Shelt stared at the light screen in front of him. The puppets guarding the passageways outside the lab were going berserk. They weren't under the AI system's control at all, and one of the experimenters walking outside had already been torn to pieces. While Shelt was talking to the AI system, everyone's gazes were focused on the light screen due to the commotion outside. While the experimenters were running into the lab, Cheto followed the people who were rushing into the lab. The newly hatched parasites were running towards the people around them. Shelt was angry because of the puppets' rampage outside the projection. "Just clean them up." "I'm sorry, the cleaning equipment has malfunctioned, and the power supply is insufficient," the AI system said. Shelt was a research maniac, but he was definitely not a good analyst. His intelligence was all in experiments, and his ability to analyze the situation was far inferior to his research ability. It was also a factor Knight and the others had considered when they came up with their plan. Insufficient supply? How can there be insufficient supply? Where are the energy blocks? Send someone to find them. How can a lab's power go out? "Boss, something's wrong with test subject number 107. A researcher said. "What's going on?" Shelt roared. The test subjects here were his blood, sweat, and tears. How could they be acting strangely without a good result? Right now, a lion-like beast locked inside the surveillance lab, number 107, was scratching the walls around it madly. The walls were all reinforced, so it was not that easy to scratch through. However, this test subject thought that it could not scratch inside, so it started using its body to ram into the walls. Its 5-meter-tall body slammed into the reinforced walls, producing a series of dull thuds. The surrounding air vibrated along with it. "Boss, we can't go on like this. Do I need you to tell me that?" Schelt slapped the researcher who spoke. "Aren't you in charge of this test subject? How could something like this happen?" I don't know either." The researcher shivered. Although he usually vented his anger on this test subject, it was always within the test subject's tolerance. Something like this had never happened before. Ow. According to the analysis, test subject number 107's nervous system is damaged. The air input from the local life support system contains a gas that can cause nerve damage. The AI system analyzed the measured data and reported. Slap. Another slap to the face. If he had a gun in his hand, Sheldon would definitely have shot this researcher dead. From his point of view, the error in the local health system's gas input was definitely a problem with the researcher. Restoring the air composition. Before Schelt could finish his sentence, Al reported the same thing that had happened in several other laboratories. Boss, did someone invade and cause trouble?" A researcher behind Schelt asked in a low voice. Slap. Another slap. Schelt said angrily, "If someone invaded, do you think Al is just a decoration?" The other researchers all lowered their heads. As for what they were cursing in their hearts, they did not know. This had just been solved when the AI system indicated that there were several more abnormal conditions in the test subjects in the experimental rooms. Cylin had added something to the life support system of this experimental room, introducing the gas released from the blood of the puppets after they were infected. It was not just test subject number 107. Cylin had also added the same thing to the other experimental rooms. The problem with the test subject had not been solved yet. At this moment, a researcher screamed and squatted down while holding his head. His 10 fingers hugged his head tightly as if he was going to stab his fingers into it. His veins protruded, and his eyes began to change. The white of his eyes was gradually replaced by black and red. This was just the beginning. Researchers with the same situation followed one after another. Now, Schelt also knew that something was wrong. There's a source of pollution here. Who brought in? Al, check the source. Check the source. Unknown source found. The light screen that appeared showed the location of the research institute that carried the source. Get rid of it, Schelt said mercilessly. Boss, don't kill me. Schelt, you can't do this. We can still be saved. Ignoring the shouts of the experimenters, a transparent barrier enveloped the experimenters. With a flash of white light, they turned into dust. Analyze the type of source, Schelt ordered. Sorry, unable to analyze the type. How is this possible? Before Al could answer, the experimental rooms where the test subjects were locked opened one after another. The animals inside rushed out and bit anyone they saw. Al, Schelt roared while fleeing. Sorry, unable to control, Al's AI system said. Screams sounded again and again, but how could the researchers fight against the newly released test subjects? Cheto admitted that he had arrived at a control room when he was not paying attention. Screech, following the sound, Cheto looked over. There was a person standing there. No, it was an image created by the system. It was a beautiful girl dressed in white, but she didn't look like a pure human. Her eyes were closed left and right instead of up and down, and there was a pair of snow-white wings on her back. She looked like a certain character from the myth of creation. Schelt said that I am the best AI system, the girl said while looking at Cheto. There was no joy or anger in her voice. It was more of a gentle, breezy voice. Cheto looked at the image for a moment before turning around and continuing to walk inside. He said while walking, but Cylin said that I am the AI system with the most potential. I think so too. Following Cheto's voice, the girl's image began to become intermittent and then extinguished. Cheto opened the lab door and let the test subjects out. A while later, he opened a room where Shueisha and Chiefing were locked. Entering the lab, Cylin was about to bring the unconscious Shueisha and Chiefing out when his communicator rang. It was night. What is it? Cylin asked. I have bad news. According to a source, One of Miracle's executives, Caldwell, had just given the order to destroy this base, and it will only cause accidents. Chapter 198. I have bad news. According to our sources, Caldwell, one of the executives of Miracle, had just ordered us to destroy this base and make it look like an accident. How much time do we have left? Scylla asked. I don't know, but it's best if we leave the base within 10 minutes. We'll meet up at the Miracle Goddess. All right. Scylla, be careful. Although the incident back then wasn't real, he still felt a sense of suffocation every time he thought back to it. I know. You guys be careful too. After ending the call, Scylla carried the unconscious Chiefing and Shuecho out and passed them to Cheto. Take them to the Miracle Goddess's statue. Chocho and Wheeze are heading that way. Leave this place immediately. This place is going to be cleaned. What about you? Cheto asked. You guys go first. I'll catch up later. Cheto nodded and stopped asking questions. He put on the protective masks for Chiefing and Shuecho, grabbed them in each hand, and ran outside. Cheto had released all the experimental beasts he had locked up in the base. Although the parasites didn't like them too much, the vapors of the parasite-infected puppet's blood were enough to drive them mad. The maddened experimental beasts fought against the base's guards and the uncontrollable parasite-infected puppets. Severed limbs and bloodstains could be seen everywhere. Gunshots, curses, screams of pain, and roars of beasts were all mixed together. Cheto had activated a protective barrier around himself. Right now, his main goal was to escape, not attack. That was why Cheto was nimbly weaving through the gaps between the giant experimental beasts. If there were any puppets blocking his way, Cheto would simply ram his way through them. Cheto's cannonball-like impact knocked the puppets over like they had been rammed by an armored car. After the gray cat received Scylla's message, it led Tang Chocho away through a small, secluded passageway. The passageway was originally used to transport medicine and goods, so it was a little crowded even for an adult. It was even more impossible for the puppets and the gigantic experimental beasts to enter. Moreover, the parasites didn't give a damn about them either, so Tang Chocho and the gray cat's escape was relatively smooth. Tang Chocho had sniped a couple of experimenters and a dozen or so puppets. She had also found her emblem in an inventory room. In the face of the puppets that had already become inhuman and the experimental beasts that were roaring and baring their fangs and claws, Tang Kikikyu was much calmer than her peers. The environment in which she had grown up, coupled with the many things she had experienced later on, had tempered her mind and made her much more tenacious. Tang Chocho did not ask what would happen to the others. After Hui Mao said that he would take her away, Tang Chocho quickly followed behind Hui Mao without a word. In a hunter regiment, doing their job well was the greatest help to the team. Scylla looked at the time, left the lab, and walked toward another passage. Under Cheto's command, all the access controls in this area were removed and all the passages were opened. Scylla ran toward a certain direction. When Scylla walked into this area, he had a feeling that there was an inexplicable attraction from a certain direction in this area, beckoning Scylla to go there. Olilo's star map fragment. It resonated with the one he obtained from the Sky Prison Hunter Regiment's traderback at Sector S. Right now, the two fragments were attracting each other like two magnets. Although one was inside subspace, the attraction between them was as clear as day. A puppet covered in black and red blood rushed towards him. Scylla jumped up and stepped on the puppet's head before jumping far away. He flicked out his wrist blade and cut open the head of a puppet in front of him with a pop. At the entrance of the passage ahead, an experimental beast was fighting against a puppet. The narrow space of the passage limited the experimental beast's abilities, and the puppets had the advantage in numbers and were much stronger than their original bodies before they were modified. It was a situation where both sides were heavily injured. The experimental beast was repeatedly stepping on some of the fallen puppets on the ground. Half of their bodies had been stomped into meat paste, but their heads were still there. Their mouths were open and closed, and their faces were covered in protruding meridians and black and red blood. It was a very strange sight. Scylla seized an opening and slipped through like a swimming fish. Before the puppets and experimental beast could react, he quickly left. I'm almost there. After turning the corner, Scylla saw a room. The door to this room was closed, which meant that this room was not under Elle's control. It was clearly in Elle's network area, but it was not under Elle's control. One could imagine how special this room was. Moreover, the star map fragment Scylla was looking for was inside this room. Since he didn't know if it required iris, fingerprints, genes, or something else to pass through, Scylla didn't use the information Cheto collected directly. He took out a button-like object and sucked it onto the scanner. A light screen popped up, and some characters appeared on the light screen. Scylla's fingers flew across the light screen. After the characters were combined and decoded, they flashed by one after another and slowly formed a double link. Mitochondrial DNA? Inside the room, Shelt was covered in blood. He was connected to the communicator while receiving treatment from the medical apparatus. He was panting heavily. However, no one answered his call. Shelt felt colder and colder, and the feeling of uneasiness grew stronger and stronger. This uneasiness escalated to a certain degree and turned into extreme anger. Although Shelt was usually simple-minded when it came to anything outside of experiments, he had finally thought through some things. "Caldwell, are you trying to destroy this research base?" Shelt's hand, holding the communicator, was shaking. He murmured, "You can't do this. You can't. These are all rare experimental data. You can't lose them. You absolutely can't lose them." Beep. The door opened. Shelt abruptly turned his head to look outside the door. A pungent smell came into the room, and there were roars and gunshots in the distance. There was no one outside the door. Who's outside?" Shelt's voice was a little hoarse and filled with intense panic. There was no reply. Shelt barely managed to prop himself up. The hand holding the gun was still trembling. The broken bones and damaged muscles made even the smallest movement extremely difficult for him. It was already a blessing that he was able to make it this far alive. Pooh! A needle was pierced into Shelt's neck, and the toxins contained in the needle quickly seeped into Shelt's body. When Shelt fell, he only saw a hazy figure. Although the toxins attacked quickly, Shelt's tolerance to drugs had improved after so many years of research. He didn't faint immediately. Instead, he pointed to a cabinet. "Take it away." After uttering these two words, Shelt didn't make any more movements. The cabinet also had a password set, but it did not take Scylla much time to crack it. Opening the thick alloy cabinet, there was only a metal box inside, and the password to the metal box was Shelt's genetic sequence. After opening the metal box, Scylla saw a star atlas fragment and a chip inside. Without checking what was inside the chip, there was no time. Scylla searched the room briefly and came out. As soon as he stepped out, he saw an image. It was Elle, and the image was created by the system. A beautiful girl dressed in white, special eyelids, and a pair of snow-white wings on her back. Scylla thought that it was Elvia, the goddess of miracles from the myth of creation. Right now, Elle's image was unstable and flickering from time to time. "Are you Scylla? Is it the intelligent system you created?" Elle asked. Scylla frowned. It seemed that the AI system in the research base still had a buffer, and it still survived Cheto's interception. Scylla did not answer, but Elle continued, "I'm just telling you that I'm not my father's proudest creation. I'm just an eliminated one, and my father gave it a Shelt." "Who is your father?" "All I know is that people call him Juno. He's the one who created the strongest AI system in this world. Not you." Elle's image disappeared with the last word. "Who is Juno?" Scylla put the question aside for now. Right now, the most important thing was to escape this place. There were only 3 minutes left in the 10 minutes that Lynette had mentioned. The research base was still filled with chaos and panic. The parasites seemed to have entered a hotbed as they gnawed on the puppets' brains madly. The puppets were even crazier, and the only thing left in their minds was slaughter. The experimental beasts were rampaging, and the gaseous environment inside the base was making them more and more irritable. The experimenters had become the sacrifices of both sides, and after the guards saw the situation, they no longer cared about what was going on here. They all had the mentality to escape. On the other side of the planet, there was a bustling city. Inside a tall building, Caldwell looked at the giant statue of the goddess at the edge of the city and said softly, "Some people are destined to become sacrifices." Shell has undoubtedly brought great profits to Miracle, but even under such circumstances, he still cannot change his fate. He can only blame himself for being too conceited and not listening to advice. Many people had criticized Miracle for so many years because of Shelt's matter, but when these criticisms accumulated together, it became a different story. Finally, it exploded directly this time. Caldwell's words sounded dignified, but in fact, how could Shelt do these things without the tacit approval of the management? Boss, everything is ready. Let's begin. Yes. Caldwell looked at the image in his hand. The vast base was slowly expanding in all directions with a loud bang like a storm. Everything was sucked in, torn apart, and destroyed. The huge research base was reduced to ashes after this loud bang. Dust and debris were swept toward the city along with the wave of air, but the momentum was just right in front of the giant statue of the goddess, weakening to a bearable range. What was left was no different from an ordinary sandstorm. However, the sky full of sand and dust also blocked the view of some people. The giant statue of the goddess, Elvia, the god of miracles in the myth of creation. The wings on her back seemed to bear the pain for everyone. Her open arms and those smiling eyes that were wrapped in special eyelids were said to bring miracles to people. Pure white ankles were wrapped around her ankles, and they looked as if they were dancing in the sandstorm. And on top of this giant statue, between the folds of the goddess' skirt, lay many people covered in dust. Fuck poo, I blew into my mouth. Cough, cough, cough. Fuck, that was close. Thank goodness I ran fast, or I would have been blown away. What the fuck are you shouting for? Is everyone here? Knight crouched down in the folds and said to the communicator. The group of 10 people reported their situation one after another. The statue of the goddess was huge, and there were a lot of folds on the goddess skirt. Everyone arrived at different times and crouched down in different places. After confirming their positions, they slowly gathered toward Knight. Huimao, Tang Chiochio, Cheto, and Cheto Shuechio and Chiefing had found a place to crouch down, but Silen's figure was nowhere to be seen. Silen, are you there? Knight spoke into the communicator again. Knight would ask every once in a while, but there was no reply until now. His temper rose again. Where the hell are you? Can't you give me a fucking squeak? Knight was yelling at the communicator when a flying claw suddenly flew toward him. He tilted his head to the side and evaded it. The flying claw landed on the protruding folds with a clang, and the thin threads attached to the claw contracted. Then, a person smashed over and collided with Knight with a bang, almost causing Knight to slip and fall down from the impact. Holy shit, fuck. Knight slid down and rolled on the ground. After he steadied himself, he kicked the culprit. Can't you just hit me somewhere else? Ahem. Silen wiped the sand off his face and sat down with his back, leaning against the protruding part of the crease. He ignored Knight's kick and smiled at him. I'm really sorry, this shitty environment is affecting my vision. Bullshit. How dare you hit me when it's affecting your vision? Knight kicked Silen a few more times while saying, Your claw almost smashed my head. You wouldn't be Knight if you were so easily smashed. Knight let out a snort and sat down next to Silen while leaning against the protruding wall. What took you so long? I ran into a little trouble, but I got something. Silen felt a lot more at ease after learning that everyone was here. My dad always says I'm restless, but you're even more restless than me, you bastard. Silen threw a punch at him. Who's your dad? Son, let's hear it. Fuck off. Silen's communicator rang while he was talking. It was Cheto. What's wrong? Silen asked. Something's wrong with Chiefing and Shuechio. They've been injected with stimulants, and they're starting to react. I'll be there immediately. Silen turned around and said something to Knight before heading to where Cheto and the others were. It was still better to catch the grappling hook rope. It would be difficult to move barehanded in a sandstorm like this, so it was better to use the grappling hook to save time. When Silen arrived, he saw Chi Feng and Shuechio convulsing all over. Tang Chiochio was looking at them worriedly from not far away. Huimao was standing in front of her, and Cheto was crouching beside Chi Feng and Shuechio. This is the analysis result of the drug's composition and effects. A small light screen appeared in front of Cheto. It displayed the drug's molecular formula and other relevant data. The sandstorm blocked the light from the sky, so Scylla and the others were all shrouded in darkness. When the light screen appeared, their surroundings were illuminated. Shuecho's pupils suddenly shrank when he felt the light from the light screen. Then, his pupils abruptly widened, and his aura turned ferocious. He bared his teeth and pounced towards the direction of the light screen. Scylla borrowed the momentum from Shuecho's charge and kicked Shuecho's side, sending him crashing into the statue's body. He also used the rebound time to wrap the rope around Shuecho's body a couple of times, but Shuecho easily broke free. "Cheto!" Scylla yelled. After receiving Scylla's signal, Cheto's hands turned into tentacles and bound Shuecho. Although Shuecho was struggling hard, he couldn't break free for the time being. Scylla wanted to use this time to analyze the drug, but it didn't take long for Chi Foam to wake up completely. His long fingernails were even sharper than before, and they left many cuts on the statue. The hair on his body was so long that it made Chi-Fing look even more like a wild beast than before. Scylla stopped Chi-Fing from pouncing towards him and yelled at Chi-Fing, "Look at me, Chi-Fing. Look into my eyes." Chi-Fing's struggling and biting movements slowly came to a stop when he saw Scylla's eyes. It was as if a power was controlling him. "Look into my eyes, Chi-Fing. Look." Scylla's deep voice brought Chi-Fing into another world amidst the whistling sandstorm. "Chi-Fing, do you remember what I asked you before you joined Vanguard? Tell me that answer again. Do you choose to be a human or a hellhound?" Chi-Fing looked into Scylla's eyes, but his eyes were unfocused. After hearing Scylla's words, Chi-Fing paused for a moment. Human. Good. Since you've chosen to be a human, suppress the beast inside you. Don't let it control your body. Suppress it and control it. Suppress it, control it. Chi-Fing repeated Scylla's words. He didn't attack again when Scylla let go of his claws. His eyes slowly closed, and he collapsed. Scylla let out a sigh of relief. The hypnosis still has some effect. This means that the effects of the drug aren't that bad yet. After analyzing the drug once, and combining it with the results Cheto had already analyzed, Scylla quickly came up with a temporary solution to the problem. He took out a few reagent bottles and injected Shuecho and Chi-Fing with the medicine according to the calculated ratio. It was only after the duo's vital signs gradually returned to normal that he relaxed. "This is all we can do for now. We'll deal with them once everything is over. Right now, we have limited resources and the situation isn't easy to deal with." "What's wrong with them?" Huimao walked over and asked. "Some of their genes have been overstimulated, causing their consciousness to weaken. It's close to going berserk, but it's slightly better than that," Scylla explained. "How much longer is this going to last?" "I don't know. It depends. At the very least, we're not alone." The research base was destroyed, but the parasites were still alive, and the gas that came with the explosion was still there. Chapter 199. Considering the scale of the research base, the sandstorm caused by this level of destruction would last for at least an hour. The sky was still covered in sand, and the wind was still as strong as ever. If he wasn't wearing a protective mask, he would have had a hard time breathing, and every time he opened his mouth, sand would come out. "Read this chip, Cheto." Scylla took out the chip from the metal box and passed it to Cheto. The fact that Shelt had stored it in the same place as Olilo's star map fragment meant that it was very important. At the very least, it was very important to Shelt. "Okay." Cheto accepted the chip, popped out a socket on his arm, and inserted it. At the same time, rays of light shot out of his eyes and gathered into an image in front of him. At first, it was just some data. Scylla could still understand it, and most of it was about the research results Shelt had done in this research base of Miracle over the years. Inside the chip was a record of every experiment subject, whether it was a failure or a success. The number of human lives sacrificed for LTEC's research was in the 5 digits, and it was growing towards the 6 digits. The number of animals sacrificed was even higher. Large beasts and all kinds of rare and exotic beasts were consumed in large quantities. It could be said that this chip was LTEC's experimental record, and it was an important piece of evidence. With this, the League of Stars could officially sue Miracle Corporation, and the upper echelons would have a huge motivation to fight for power. However, as he continued to read the chip, he discovered that the contents behind it were all characters that looked like some kind of password. Every time he tried to read the chip further, he would be blocked by these characters. Cheto tried to decode it, but no progress was made even after several attempts. Sillin stared at the characters in silence. These characters weren't unfamiliar to him. They were used in many fields, but in different fields, every character had a different extended meaning. So what was inside this chip? Sillin carefully read the characters that repeatedly blocked the reading process again and again. Suddenly, he felt that they looked a little familiar. What on earth is it? Sillin couldn't think of it right now. Everything that had happened recently had complicated his thoughts. Sometimes, he clearly felt a flash of inspiration, but he just couldn't grasp it. While Sillin was thinking, Huimao walked over and rubbed against Sillin's hand. It had eaten a full meal at the research base, and most of the experimental beasts Tang Xiuqiu encountered were eaten by Huimao. Some of them didn't taste good, but it was very full right now. It would sleep after eating, regardless of the situation. Sillin glanced at Huimao and knew that it was going to sleep again. He scratched Huimao's chin with his finger. Good boy, go to sleep. I need to think. Huimao snorted twice in dissatisfaction. This statue is not comfortable to sleep on. He looked around and saw Xiuqiu and Qifeng lying next to Tang Xiuqiu. He walked over, grabbed Qifeng's tail with his claws, and moved closer to Xiuqiu. Xiuqiu's soft, round body, thick fur, and Qifeng's tail made this temporary nest not bad. Satisfied, Huimao curled into a ball and started sleeping. Sillin suddenly remembered something when he saw Huimao curling into a ball. If it's like that, it really matched. The sequence that appeared in Sillin's mind was connected to the characters. His fingers moved continuously on the control surface and rearranged the characters. Correct, passed. Correct, passed. Correct, passed. Cheto's eyes flashed as he stared at the flashing pass on the screen. Ever since he met AI, he had a desire to learn new technology that leaned toward a human's way of thinking. The reason Sillin said that Cheto was the one with the most potential was because Cheto had the ability to determine his own direction of development within a certain bottom line. Not all passwords are suitable for normal decoding methods. Sometimes it depends on the person and the situation. Sillin's words were directed at Cheto. He didn't want Cheto to develop in the same direction as the other robots. These characters are actually the commonly used codes for amino acid abbreviations transcribed in Skelt's mitochondrial DNA. After the characters were decoded, they flashed past each other and slowly formed a ring that looked similar to Skelt's mitochondrial DNA. Once the ring was complete, the image changed and some information appeared. It was a brief introduction to the later parts of the chip. Some representative names appeared inside, and they were all people related to Miracle. There were politicians, the military, and a few famous merchant groups from the League of Stars. Other than that, Sillin also saw a familiar name, Juno, the person who created AI. At the time, Sillin didn't have the time to analyze the last words Ayr had said, but he had to admit that her last words had shaken Sillin a lot. According to AI, Juno wasn't the only one who created this AI system. The fact that AI was able to be used in Miracle Corporation's research base meant that AI's ability as a system must have been recognized. But AI said that she was eliminated by Juno. Then where were the other AIs that hadn't been eliminated? Looking at the names displayed on the screen, he realized that this was only a part of it. The later parts of the chip must have involved a lot more secrets about Miracle and more people. The importance of this chip was definitely worthy of Skelt's attention. At first, Sillin was going to give this chip to Knight, but now it would seem that he couldn't do so. It wasn't that he didn't trust Knight. It was that Sillin had no choice but to take a lot of precautions against the military. He was just about to ask Cheto to copy the earlier parts of the chip and create a new one for Knight, but Sillin rejected the idea. Knight and the others were probably almost done with the research content by now. Giving it to Cheto now wouldn't help much, and it might even raise some people's suspicions. This chip must be very important to the higher-ups of Miracle, and the fact that Sillin possessed this chip must not be exposed. Otherwise, it would be very difficult for him to return to Vanguard. After thinking for a while, Sillin decided not to tell Knight about this chip. When he came back to himself, Scylla couldn't help but sigh at Skelt's madness. He actually hid such important information inside his own mitochondrial DNA. It was obvious that according to the comparison information and sequence profile analysis, Skelt's current mitochondrial DNA wasn't his original sequence. There were a lot of major flaws in this mitochondrial DNA sequence, and the physical diseases caused by them would often require the help of equipment in daily life. In other words, Skelt didn't hesitate to modify his own mitochondrial DNA in order to keep this information a secret, even if it left him with physical defects. What kind of madness was this? Skelt was a relatively extreme person. He made Scylla think of Ori, the man who hid underground all year round, used complicated and primitive methods to avoid the planet's investigation, and even modified himself to look like that. One should never underestimate the madness of such researchers. They were ruthless to others, but even more ruthless to themselves. After reading the decoded information of this mitochondrial DNA, the last piece of information shocked Scylla again and again. The remaining information in the chip was also blocked by some character codes, and it required a decoding method similar to the mitochondrial DNA sequence. However, the decoding method was no longer using Skelt's mitochondrial DNA, but the genomic DNA inside his body. Not only did he modify his mitochondrial DNA, he also modified the genomic information inside his body. He didn't modify it in the best and strongest direction, but in the direction of confidential information. Such a modification would lower his constitution and gene rank by several levels compared to his original state. Right now, Skelt's gene rank was C, and his handling genes were probably a rank as well. Turning himself from an A rank person to a C rank person wasn't just an ordinary kind of cruelty. Cheto, have you collected all of Skelt's genomic information? Scylla asked. Yes, I have. For safety's sake, I even took a portion of tissue samples to preserve. I also took a bit of somatic and gonadal cells. The corner of Scylla's eyes twitched. Gonadal cells. How did this guy take them? However, I discovered that there are two different sets of DNA in his gonadal tissue samples. One set is the same as the somatic tissue samples, and the other set is different. Scylla was astonished. Although this phenomenon existed in other races in the League of Stars, it was rare to see such a situation in the general human race, and Skelt was undoubtedly a general human. In that case, the information stored in the chip is twice as much as I imagined. He had always thought that Skelt was just one of the many important researchers of Miracle, but now it seemed that Skelt possessed far more information than he knew from his current position. Logically speaking, the higher-ups of Miracle shouldn't have done something like this so carelessly if Skelt's information was used to locate where he should be. Scylla suddenly thought of Al, the artificial intelligence system that Juno had gifted to Skelt. It seemed that most of this information came from Al. He recalled Skelt's words of taking when he collapsed and the hateful gaze in his eyes. That gaze wasn't directed at Scylla, but at Caldwell, the manager who had ordered the destruction of the research base. Skelt had purposely given this chip to Scylla in order to take revenge on Caldwell. After putting away the chip and asking Cheto to keep this record secret, Scylla settled Tang Chiochio down and checked on Shuecho and Chiefing's conditions before contacting Knight. At first, he was going to discuss the upcoming bitter battle with Knight, but Knight brought a piece of good news. The army's reinforcements would arrive in 6 hours, and as long as they could hold on for 6 hours, they would be able to survive successfully. Since the army could arrive in 6 hours, Scylla wasn't going to release the remaining parasite eggs. After the storm had passed, the killers Caldwell had sent to carry out the cleanup mission would definitely be waiting for Scylla and the others. The light gradually grew stronger, the sand and dust covering the sky thinned, and the wind gradually slowed down. What about Shuecho and Chiefing? Tang Chiochio asked. The medicine can temporarily suppress the stimulant in their bodies for 20 hours. I'll give them another shot later to wake them up first. They won't go crazy like before under the medicine suppression, Scylla answered. 10 minutes later, Scylla received Knight's operation signal and gave Chiefing and Shuecho a shot to wake them up. After waking up, Chifeng and Shueqiu felt that their memories were blank, but Silin didn't give them time to recall. After explaining the operation's precautions and route, he began to move. If all the sand and dust stopped, then they would be completely exposed, and they would be in a more passive position. It was better to leave this place as soon as possible, find a place to hide, and snipe and counter-snipe. They had worked together at Seven Lights before, and although it was almost 4 years ago, Silin and Knight's cooperation was very smooth now. A gesture was all it took to know which route to move stealthily next. The western image showed the map and terrain of the city after scanning, and Silin instructed Tang Qiuqiu and the others about their operation route. The gray cat opened its blurry eyes and yawned. It crouched at the edge of the fold wall and stared at the city that was separated by a layer of wind and sand. It said quietly, "Actually, there's another way. It's safer this way." "What way?" Silin and Tang Qiuqiu looked at Huimao. Huimao licked his claws and said calmly, "Dig a hole." Silin, "Our main goal right now is to delay until the military's rescue team arrives. It's not like we're going to attack. If we hide underground and perform a little surgery on their underground detection device, it won't be a problem to delay them for 6 hours. But the truth is that you're too lazy to move, aren't you?" Silin criticized inwardly. "You're the only one who can hide underground. How are we supposed to hide?" Huimao looked at Cheto. "This guy is an excavator." Silin looked at Cheto. It sounded reasonable. "Where's the best place to hide?" Silin asked. The assassins would definitely pay attention to the ground when they were cleaning. Wouldn't it be obvious that something was wrong if they saw a hole? Huimao looked around, his beard shook, and he said with certainty, "From under the goddess' skirt." 2 minutes later, Knight stood beside the goddess' feet and looked up. There was a hole just big enough for one person to pass through in a corner where the skirt was covering. He couldn't even fart for a long time. In fact, they were prepared to fight a hard battle. But Yulu agreed with Silin's idea. The most important thing in a mission was the result, not the process. Their job was to protect the evidence and hand it over when the reinforcements arrived. The hole above the ground was a little narrow because they had to pay attention to secrecy. But underground, the hole was a little wider and extended all the way to the bottom of a certain tall building in the city. The hole under the goddess' skirt was sealed again. It was very difficult to discover that there used to be a hole there unless you looked carefully and didn't use any equipment. The aura and some small traces left behind at the goddess' skirt were swept away by the wind and sand. "This place isn't bad." Yulu nodded in satisfaction as he walked along the temporary underground shelter they dug. They always carried oxygen supply equipment with them when they moved, so they wouldn't suffocate even if the shelter was sealed. "Although we've blocked the scanning from above, we still can't know what's going on up there," Feng Haichao said with a frown. They were a little worried about a situation they couldn't control. "Cheto, go up and take a look," Silin said. "That's not very good, is it?" Someone in Knight's squad objected. They didn't know that Cheto was a robot, so they were worried that he would be exposed if he went out. "It's fine." Knight shot Silin a glance and stopped the 2 people in his squad from saying anything. "Let's do this, Cheto. Please." Cheto nodded in a gentlemanly manner, but he immediately started digging. They couldn't see his hand movements clearly, but it felt like the rocks and soil were parting directly to the sides, and Cheto was moving forward at a walking pace. The sound he made during the whole process was so soft that it didn't sound like he was digging a hole at all. Everyone in the military acknowledged a capable person, not to mention that he was a comrade who had gone through thick and thin together. Therefore, Knight's squad's impression of Cheto rose to a whole new level. They didn't notice that Cheto was digging a hole in front of them when they entered the cave, so they couldn't help but exclaim in surprise when they saw him now. At first, they thought that Cheto was holding a high-end machine that could open holes, but now it felt like Cheto's hands were digging in like tofu, and then he pushed the hole to the sides. Who would have thought that this kid was so skilled? After Cheto went up, he hid himself in a remote corner of the underground building and avoided the surveillance cameras. His body transformed and stuck to the metal objects around him. If someone came in to take a look, they wouldn't know that there was an intruder here at all. Cheto followed the surveillance network and transmitted everything that was happening around the building to Silin, who was hiding underground. Due to the gas pollution that drifted over after the destruction of the research base, some people's nervous systems were affected. A portion of the manpower in the city was sent to deal with these people. There weren't many parasites left, so they were quickly taken care of by Crodwell's men. Some of the guards who escaped from the lab were killed by the assassins, and all the humans and beasts who escaped from the lab were taken care of by the people scattered around the city. However, in another tall building in the city, Crodwell was very angry because he hadn't found the intruders yet. He wasn't stupid enough to think that the intruders had perished along with the research base. Send more men and continue to search. Search thoroughly. Search the guards thoroughly. I'd rather kill the wrong person than let a suspicious person go. Crodwell roared angrily. The army would be here in a few hours, and if the rats found some bad evidence, Caldwell's future would be bleak. However, an hour passed. 2 hours, 3 hours. The sweat on Crodwell's forehead grew thicker and thicker. His communicator rang, and on the other end stood a man in military uniform with the insignia of a major general. Mr. Crodwell, long time no see. Chapter 200. The person with the rank of a major general might look young, but the steadiness and reserved sharpness in his eyes made it obvious at first glance that he was no ordinary person. Fiegler Holando. Caldwell almost growled the name out loud. He had always been gnashing his teeth at this name. Fiegler Holando was 10 years older than Knight. Due to his family background, he had joined the army a long time ago, and Holando had already started killing enemies on the battlefield before Knight had even entered the army. His personal ability and dazzling military achievements had allowed him to rise to the rank of a major general at such a young age. The reason Caldwell was gnashing his teeth at Holando like this was because Holando had targeted them more than once, and Caldwell had suffered a lot at Holando's hands. That was why Caldwell revealed an undisguised hatred the moment he saw this person. But compared to Caldwell's reaction, Holando was very calm. He was even smiling a little, and that smile was an eyesore in Caldwell's eyes no matter how he looked at it. According to the information Caldwell received, the army that had come in the name of formula inspection this time wasn't Fiegler Holando. If it was anyone else, Caldwell wouldn't have lost his composure like this, but it was obvious that it was Fiegler Holando. This man would never give them a way out if he found an opportunity. Why is it you? The armrest of the chair in Caldwell's hand was left with a deep handprint. It must be known that the things Caldwell used were all of the highest quality, and for such an armrest to be left with a handprint like it was made of mud, one could imagine how Caldwell was feeling right now. In response to Caldwell's question, Hulanduo only smiled. His smile made Caldwell want to rush over and stomp on his face. It can't be helped. Some people in the army are just too inefficient. I can't stand it. While Caldwell was sending people all over the planet to search for Serene and the others were safe and sound underground. They could even receive Cheto's live stream. Knight, it's about time now. Should we contact the army? Someone asked. Knight shook his head. There's no telling who's leading the army this time. If someone over there leaks our location to Caldwell, then we're dead for sure. Based on Caldwell's personality, as long as there was a suspected base, he would do his best to destroy it. According to the plan, if there was something wrong with the reinforcements from the army, how could they be delayed? Or was it because the voices in the army weren't united? There were people who leaned towards miracle. Before this matter was over, Knight would never trust anyone without confirming the leader's identity. Stabbing someone in the back was the most unjust. Silin checked on Chiefing and Shuechio's condition. Both of them were in a very bad state of mind. Although the medicine had suppressed the effects of the stimulant, it had also made them feel fatigued and unable to exert any strength. He could only hope that this matter would end as soon as possible so that they could receive a comprehensive treatment. Keep them under control. Otherwise, there might not be anyone around to help you if something similar happens in the future, Silin said to Chiefing and Shuechio. Chiefing gritted his teeth and nodded. The tuft of hair on his head had grown again. When Chiefing lowered his head, it covered his eyes so that no one could see his expression clearly. Silin rubbed Chiefing's head and pulled him closer to himself. It was also a silent encouragement and comfort. Shuechio's round body was squeezed together with Tang Chiochio. and Tang Xiuqiu was combing its fur with her fingers. Lying in Silen's arms, Hui Mao's ears suddenly twitched. His eyes were still closed, but his head had tilted slightly in a certain direction. No one else noticed this detail, but Silen knew Hui Mao very well. It was probably the army. If it was one of Caldwell's men, the gray cat definitely wouldn't be as lazy as it was now. As expected, Cheto quickly sent a message saying that the army was approaching the planet. Don't go out yet. Let's see who's leading the army. Knight stopped his men from getting up and said, Cheto, pay attention to the leader of the army, Silen ordered. Got it. Cheto followed the surveillance network and hacked into the defense system of some other buildings. At first, he wanted to hack into the satellite network, but Silen told him not to take the risk this time. Therefore, Cheto only hacked into the information network on the ground. The light screen in front of Silen showed the image of the army's warship. The League of Stars' military emblem was on the warship. Unlike Silen's starship, the army's warship landed directly on the ground. It looked very dignified and intimidating. Moreover, before the battleship landed, many fighter aircrafts flew out from inside, densely packed together in all directions. Some aircrafts also flew out alone. They must have been assigned missions long ago, so they all flew away very straightforwardly. 2 of the 3 warships landed, and the last one stayed outside the planet to prevent certain accidents and prevent certain important figures of the miracle on the planet from escaping. After the warship landed, armored vehicles, tanks, and squads of infantry came out one after another. After that, Hulan Du and his men slowly walked out. Hulan Du looked at the nearby city and said, "Move out." Yes. A major behind him saluted and left with his men. Strange, we haven't received any news from those kids yet. Even the locator can't find their position. A person standing behind Hulan Du looked at the light screen that had popped up from a disc in his hand, then glanced around and asked in confusion. They're either completely wiped out or they're hiding very well. Do you think they're completely wiped out? The man looked at Hulan Du. How is that possible? We're from the Fiegler family. It's not that easy. The man only chuckled when he heard Hulan Du's extremely confident words. Let's go find those kids. I think they're in this city. It's just that we in Caldwell can't find them. When Hulan Du and his men walked towards the city, Knight and the others who were hiding underground all had different reactions. How could it be them? Yulu asked doubtfully. According to his thoughts, the 2 of them shouldn't have come personally for something like this. They should have taken over later on. Otherwise, how could their team have met with such a delay? Feng Haichao said. Although the 2 of them weren't very high in terms of military rank, the significance they represented was great. Even if there were different voices in the army, no one would dare to openly obstruct the 2 of them when they appeared at the same time. These 2 were not to be trifled with, and the people behind them were even more so. At the same time, it meant one thing. There was already a conclusion to the matter of miracle. If it's them, then there's nothing to worry about. Ruo Lin stood up and stretched. His heart was finally at ease, and he felt much more relaxed. After Silen saw the Major General leading the army on the screen, he looked at Knight. The 2 of them looked somewhat similar. When Knight saw the 2 people on the screen, he cursed in a low voice, F***CK. Why are these 2 guys who usually don't show up here at the same time? Although he was cursing, his eyes were full of smiles, and he no longer had the doubts and wariness from before. Who are they? Silen asked. Knight pointed at the person who looked somewhat similar to him and said, This is my cousin Fiegler Holando. He's 10 years older than me and has already become a major general. Knight then pointed at the person beside Holando. As for this one, don't you think he looks familiar? Silen took another look. He did look somewhat like that arrogant fellow. Someone from the G family? Knight gave a thumbs up. Pride's that brat's second brother, Ji Feihong. He's only a few years older than us, but he's already been promoted to lieutenant colonel. Pretty fast. Then what about you? Silen asked with a smile. Ahem, I'm not talented, just a mere first lieutenant. Suddenly remembering something, Knight gave Silen a punch. Didn't that guy Lung tell you? He did. Then why the hell are you asking? I'm just asking. It's been almost a year. Who knows if you've been promoted? I'll be promoted when I get back. I'll be promoted to colonel within a year. Then I wish you a happy promotion in advance. In the League of Stars, the promotion of one's military rank was achieved through hard work. Just like this time, if they had not encountered Scylla, Knight and the others would definitely have experienced a difficult and bloody battle. Are you preparing to go out? Scylla asked. Knight looked at the time and said, in another hour. Based on Knight's understanding of Hollando, an hour was more than enough for the matters above to be settled. That would be the most suitable time to go out. Of course, Knight had another thought, which was to see if Hollando and Ji Feihong could find them within this hour. If they could not, then it could only be said that the people on Scylla's side were indeed very capable. Above, Hollando was already facing Caldwell. This time, it was an absolute suppression. If Caldwell resisted, he would be killed on the spot. This was because Hollando's actions had been approved by the higher-ups. Even if he blew up this planet, no one would say anything. Caldwell did not want to die yet, so he did not resist. He would not contact the assassins he had sent out, and if he did and was caught by Hollando, there would be yet another piece of evidence pressed against him. What Caldwell did not know, however, was that Hollando would find out about this sooner or later, and his methods of revenge would be even more vicious. After all, the people he had sent to kill were from the Fiegler family. After detaining Caldwell and some of the management personnel of Miracle, Hollando looked at Caldwell, who was still acting all high and mighty, and said calmly, "Don't hope that anyone will plead on your behalf. You're nothing but a sacrificial pawn." To Caldwell, these words were undoubtedly a sharp blade that pierced straight into his heart. How laughable! He, Caldwell, had just mocked Shelt as a sacrificial pawn, but a few hours later, it would be his turn. As a sacrificial pawn, he knew very well how the people behind Miracle did things. They would never let him live to the final trial. "You can't do this to me. You can't do this to me. I'm going to see." Before Caldwell could finish his sentence, he was knocked unconscious by a soldier indicated by Hollando. The main point of the instructions Hollando had received was not on the people behind Miracle. He had already received quite a few hints. What should be vague should be vague. There are some things that everyone knew even if he did not say them. Others might not know who was behind Miracle, but there was no way that person from the Fiegler family did not know. As for the evidence Knight was looking for, it was nothing more than an honorable reason to make a move. Moreover, this move was nothing more than a cover for the overall goal. Only when Hollando accepted this mission did he realize why the military had suddenly unified their voices. "Go look for it." Hollando gave Ji Feihong a look. Ji Feihong nodded and walked out with a small box in his hand. Not long after, Ji Feihong returned with the box. Nothing could be seen on his face, but the brief exchange of glances between Ji Feihong and Hollando proved that everything had gone smoothly and the item had been obtained. Obtaining the item proved that the main objective of this mission had been achieved. "Since we've obtained the item, it's about time to let those little fellows out, right?" Ji Feihong put the box away and said with a smile, "But these little fellows sure have some tricks up their sleeves. Even now, I still can't figure out their exact location. All I know is that they're in this city." Hollando looked at the time and said, "They'll be out soon." The members of the Fiegler family more or less understood each other, and Knight and Hollando were people who were more familiar with each other's style of doing things. Just as Hollando finished speaking, the light screen on the circular detector in Ji Feihong's hand displayed a strong signal. "Oh, it's true, but it's actually here. According to the reports I received, this place has already been carefully searched. I didn't expect to be fooled by them." 10 minutes later, Knight brought his men to Hollando's side. "I didn't expect the two of you to come." Knight raised his hand and punched Ji Feihong. He only called Hollando, who was sitting on a chair with his legs crossed, "Bro." Then he dragged a chair over and sat down. What a difference between a stranger and a stranger. If it wasn't for your somewhat similar face, people would have thought that Ji Feihong is your brother. Hollando said. Knight shrugged. "It can't be helped. You started too early, old bro, and the generation gap between us is too deep. Back when Brother Feihong brought us to fight, old bro was pacifying Sector V's chaos." Hollando swept his gaze across the group of people sent over by the two squads of soldiers. In the end, his gaze landed on Sillin. Knight, aren't you going to introduce these people? Sillin's group was either an animal or a half-human, and there was even a child. When he thought about the situation from before, he felt awkward no matter how he looked at it. Knight introduced Sillin briefly and told him directly about Sillin's identity and his purpose in coming to this planet. As for some details, he did not explain. It was at this time that Halando received a report from his subordinate that the 3rd and 6th B Squadron starships were heading towards this planet. The people who've come to pick you up are here. Halando looked at the 2 starships on the display and said. Halando did not make things difficult for Sillin's group. In fact, he even sent a space plane to send them over. In reality, it wasn't that Halando did not want to ask, it was that he could not. The way he looked at Knight was already glaring at him a few times. As for Ji Fei Hong, when he heard the name Sillin, he looked at Sillin with a meaningful gaze. The first time he heard the name Sillin was from his younger brother Pride. Ji Fei Hong had no choice but to look at a person who could make the usually proud Pride give such a high evaluation. However, it looked like they would not have the chance to learn more about him now. 2 squads of the Hunter Regiment had come over to demand their people, so they could not hold them back no matter what. When Sillin was facing Hulan Du and Ji Fei Hong, she did not show any special expression. There was no nervousness, and there was no obvious alienation. She just had a calm attitude, and she even gave Hulan Du and Ji Fei Hong a smile that could be considered sincere out of respect for Knight. However, that smile looked silly no matter how one looked at it. It made the corner of Knight's mouth twitch. Sillin brought Tang Chiochio and the others on the space plane sent by Halando and arrived at the spaceport outside the planet. There was already a space plane waiting there. Shotten, Carrie, and the others were all standing there. When they saw that Sillin and the others were unscathed, they also let out a sigh of relief. Shotten stopped Carrie from speaking. We'll talk when we get back. After bidding farewell to Knight through the communicator, Sillin followed Shotten back to the 6th Division starship. The first thing he did when he got back was to call Tico and Lycrabe over. Together, they gave Chiefing and Shuecho a thorough checkup and treated them accordingly. After working for nearly 50 hours, they were finally released. After exiting the infirmary, Sillin briefly told everyone about what had happened on that planet. No matter what, at least everyone was fine. Shotten also let out a sigh of relief. However, he was also rather angry at the Miracle Company. Who would have thought that the people of Miracle would be so daring? They clearly knew the identities of Tang Chiochio and the others, but they still dared to make a move. If they were from the A Squadron, the people of Miracle probably would not dare to touch them. It seemed that the 6th Division still had to hurry up and develop. After working for so long, Sillin was unbelievably tired. After taking care of everything, he took a shower and lay down on his bed, ready to rest. However, before that, there was one more thing he had to take care of. He scooped up Hui Mao, who was lying on the edge of the bed pretending to be asleep, and rubbed Hui Mao's belly. Tell me, I haven't had a good sleep for a few days, and I've lost a lot of weight. Hui Mao snorted as he opened his eyes and complained, I wanted to tell you for a long time, but you've been busy. I couldn't find a chance. After changing to a more comfortable position, Hui Mao said, When I was at Knight's place, I felt a familiar presence. What presence? The presence of Olillo's star map fragment. It's different from yours, but I'm sure that it's Olillo's star map fragment. Although there was no attraction between the different star map fragments of Olillo's star map, for someone like Hui Mao, attraction was not needed. Olillo's star map fragments all had some slight similarities. By remembering a presence, as long as there was an Olillo's star map fragment within a certain range, Hui Mao would be able to sense it, and he would even be able to tell if they belonged to the same star map. After hearing what Hui Mao said, Sillin could think of many things along the same line. No wonder those two would appear at the same time, and no wonder the military's voices were unified so quickly regarding the miracle matter. The military of the League of Stars was a huge machine that should never be underestimated. Chapter 201. After they sent Sillin and the others away, Hudu and Ji Fei Hong both asked about Sillin, and the news they received shocked them beyond words. The fact that Vanguard was able to evade their detection and escape from so many puppets and experimental beasts proved that Vanguard truly lived up to its name. Even their bee squadrons were impressive. After the matters of the Miracle Corporation's branch on this planet were settled, Hudu and Ji Feihong sat in a private meeting room. I remember that Sillin was listed on the A rank in the secret report regarding the 6th Division. Hudu said, the military of the League of Stars had a secret list. At that time, the League of Stars would list out some famous forces or people who were as famous as the 4 great hunter regiments. From high to low, they were S, A, B, and C. The A rank ranking Sillin was mostly made up of a few captains of the 4 great hunter regiments and people from the 4 main squads. Although the Vanguard Division 6 Captain Schotten was a captain, he was not listed on the A rank ranking. Instead, it was Sillin who had just taken over as a vice captain not long ago who was listed on the A rank ranking. This was something Knight did not know. He had not reached the level to know about the ranking yet. That is true. Ji Feihong nodded. Because of pride, when he found out that there was a person named Sillin in the 6B Squadron, he suspected that the assassin Pride spoke of wasn't actually dead, and that it was just a hunter regiment's ploy after completing their mission. It was exactly because he had done a special investigation and checked some military documents that Ji Feihong found out that this person had already been listed in the A rank ranking. How much do you know about him? A little. But the main reason he was listed on the A rank ranking was Wei Fun. The Wei Fun Ji Feihong spoke of was actually a mouse who once worked undercover in Poison Fawn. His real name was Wei Fun. Wei Fun, the guy who snuck into Sector V to carry out a spy mission and was promoted to Major after Poison Fong, was eliminated. He actually has such a high evaluation of Sillin. Hulan Duo still had some impression of Wei Fun, because he knew that Wei Fun had been exchanged by the military from the Vanguard. Although Wei Fun was exchanged as a captive, no one dared to slander him. After all, Wei Fun had provided a lot of high-level intelligence over the years as a spy. Moreover, the biological samples he brought back from the army were highly valued by the higher-ups. Ji Feihong briefly explained what he knew and what he learned from Wei Fun. If what Wei Fun said is true, then this Sillin person is really dangerous. After all, he is still very young. Something like potential is too difficult to fathom. Halandus sighed. When he thought of Knight, Halandus suddenly said, based on what you said, Sillin isn't just a powerful individual. He also has a wide network of connections. Your Fiegler family's Knight, Andryra family's eccentric Kai Long, the CI family's CI Jin Cheng, the 4-star academician's Old Man Mo, and the one who surprised me even more was the Yu family's little grandaunt. All of these people are connected to Sillin. Hulan Duo let out a low laugh. Interesting. He stopped studying Sillin and asked, are there still no video recordings on the other side? No. All the surveillance devices are collectively blinded, and the research base's AI system, AL, has been hacked and destroyed. That Cheto is the only person who can escape our signal detection. It is very difficult to figure out his background. Hulan Duo crossed his arms and asked in puzzlement, Cheto, Sillin, what is their relationship? Before this, I don't remember this person being mentioned in the investigation report on Vanguard Division 6. Ever since the 6th Division came out of Sector Z, the military had investigated Vanguard Division 6 in detail. However, there was no such person as Cheto. Every B squadron absorbs new blood. This Cheto is probably one of them. Unfortunately, we don't have the chance to test their strength. Hulan Duo looked at the sky outside and said in a low voice, there will be a chance. Right now, Sillin was completely unaware that he was listed on the military's secret A rank list. Right now, he was performing a final checkup on Chiefing and Shuecho together with Tico and Lycrabe. The results are pretty good. At this rate, they should be able to fully recover in 2 days. Sillin patted Shuecho's fat, but grabbed the white fatty's ear just as he was about to slip away. Control your appetite for the next 2 days after you fully recover. Don't overeat. After being listless for a few days, the white fatty had lost a lot of weight and regained his vigor. He would probably eat to his heart's content until he had indigestion. Hearing Sillin's words, Shuecho's ears drooped and looked pitifully at Sillin. There's no point in acting pitiful. Wheeze, keep an eye on him. If you see him overeating, get him a claw and make him lie down for a few more days. Got it. At the side, Huimao wagged his tail inattentively and ignored Shueqio's pleading eyes. Chiefing became a little more diligent after he recovered. He sought out Carrie and the others to give him pointers on combat and marksmanship. Even in his sleep, he practiced piloting the virtual cabin. The experience this time was a pretty big blow to him. After the disappearance incident at the City of Trade, everyone realized that this was no longer the era when people didn't even dare to touch the squads of the Big Four. After dealing with Chiefing and Shueqio, Sillin returned to his room and called Cheto over. Together, they read the chip's contents. Since he was bored, Huimao also joined in. There was a lot of information hidden in the 2 sets of DNA, but even Sillin was shocked by what he saw. There were too many people connected to Miracle Corporation, and there were some politicians who looked like they were worried about their allies and their people. In fact, they had secretly supplied Miracle Corporation with a lot of experimental subjects that came from unorthodox sources. The 13 backward sectors were especially populated by people. After all, most of the planets there were underdeveloped, and losing a few thousand people wouldn't affect them at all. It was possible to analyze the factional struggles between the political groups and the League of Stars' military from the list and its contents. Although Sillin couldn't do anything with these lists right now, it might come in handy in the future. To be honest, Sillin was a little disappointed. The Fujihara family wasn't included in the list. What kind of existence was the Hara family? Shoten had just finished reading the chip's contents when he received an urgent message and hurried to the main starship's conference room. It was a meeting. What happened this time? Sillin put away the chip and went to the main starship. What's wrong? Sillin asked. Shoten looked at the lieutenant commanders and pressed a button. A light screen appeared on the conference table and displayed a video. It was a video reported by a very influential media in the League of Stars. Olillo's cage, Sillin thought. He knew that the video was related to Olillo's cage the moment he saw it. Shoten might know a little about Olillo's cage, but the other lieutenant commanders didn't. That being said, Shoten briefly explained some things about Olillo during the meeting. He didn't go into detail, though. He only explained the important points. If the conflict 50 years ago was about the universal energy White Knight, then this time it was about another matter altogether. Moreover, it was under the military's control. Just as Hui Mao had predicted, Hulan Du and Ji Feihong obtained an Olillo star map fragment from Miracle. Adding that the military already had such star map fragments, they pieced together the star map, found the key, and opened Olillo's cage. However, they didn't expect that Olillo's cage would be like this after it was opened. In the myth of creation, one of Olillo's cages was the god's back garden that represented a fairyland. Surprisingly, the location of this god's back garden was actually a place in Sector Z. A lot of astronomers had once studied Sector Z, but due to the harsh space environment, their understanding of Sector Z was still at an elementary stage. However, a long time ago, some researchers had discovered a black hole area in Sector Z. What they saw through their binoculars was a large black area, and none of the probes they sent out had returned. Some said that it was a black hole, but according to the data provided by the probes on the outside, it wasn't a black hole. However, there was no other explanation. Those who were lucky enough to enter that area never came out again. The moment they entered the black area, all communication was cut off, and it was a permanent cut. Therefore, the League of Stars didn't have high restrictions on the development and adventuring of Sector Z. Sometimes, they would even encourage hunter regiments and adventurers to enter the area and then buy the information from these hunter regiments and adventurers at a high price. But now, no one had expected that the black hole area was actually one of Olillo's. Since the military had publicized this footage, it meant that they either had the place firmly under their control, and the reason they released this footage was to increase their influence in the League of Stars, or they had run into an unsolvable problem and needed to find a solution from the public's hands. We don't know the specifics, but I've contacted the A-Team. They said that 2 of our squads are to go there, and that the rest of Vanguard will receive us when the time comes. Shoten told the A-Team's message to them, but Sillin's thoughts weren't on it. He already knew what the A-Team's focus was, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The god's back garden that represented a fairyland. The name alone was enough to tell that there would be a lot of rare things inside, and it must be beautiful. The release footage didn't reveal anything. The military didn't release the scene inside, and only the general appearance of the black hole area after it brightened up. This was the first Olillo's cage to be opened in so many years. Not even that white knight had truly opened it before. As the first Olillo's cage to be opened, the matter behind it must be unimaginably complicated. No one could say for sure if the incident from 50 years ago would repeat itself, especially after the incident at Sector S. Sillin thinks that Mist and Wuxia were the ones who had been too quiet after the incident at Sector S, as if they had never appeared in the first place. There was also Azrael. Every incident involving Azrael was devastating. Sillin had a feeling that these guys would all appear at God's back garden this time. No matter what, we will cancel our previous mission plan and head to Sector Z with the 3rd Earth Division Squadron. Shotten said solemnly. Since the arrangements were made, the other lieutenant commanders had nothing more to say. After the meeting was adjourned, they would have their subordinates make preparations. In truth, everyone in the 6th Division had a strange feeling towards Sector Z. After all, their previous experience at Sector Z was too tragic. But as hunters, they had to get used to it. Sillin, you stay. Just as Sillin stood up and was about to leave, Shotten stopped him. After the other lieutenant commanders had left, Shotten asked, "What do you think about this incident?" "What do I think?" "Amen. Tell me what you think." "Actually, we didn't see much from our position. The A squad has never interfered with the squad's business, and if they did, it would be a big deal. Since the A squad has asked us to do this, we will go. However, there are some questions that I still want to understand," Shotten said with a frown on his chair. Sillin shook his head. "I'm not in a position to comment on the Olillo cage, but I think the A squad sent us to support them in this incident." Shotten nodded. He had considered this as well. It was fine as long as they weren't cannon fodder. With the style of the upper echelons of the 4 Great Hunter regiments, they usually wouldn't let their subordinates be cannon fodder. If they did, it would be very difficult to absorb new blood as a supplement in the future. Our B squadron isn't the only one going over this time. I believe that the other B squadrons will also go over one after another. Since Vanguard has done this, the other 3 of the Great 4 will also do the same. This way, the implications will be much wider. If the military intends to have a dispute, once a fight breaks out, it will definitely cause great damage to the entire GL. They won't do such a stupid thing. Shotten had thought about all the aspects Sillin had mentioned before, but after Sillin gave him a confirmation, Shotten also let out a small sigh of relief. After all, the 6th Division had developed to its current level after much difficulty. If they were to suffer another great blow, Shotten would vomit blood. After speaking for a while more, Sillin finally left the meeting room and went back to inform everyone about the upcoming formation and things to pay attention to. There was no need to emphasize it any further, and everyone quickly got into the mood. Sector Z was a sector that left a deep impression on them. If they weren't prepared, they might lose their lives. After giving out orders, Sillin returned to his room and closed his eyes to think on his bed. There were many things he wouldn't tell Shotten directly. It would expose too much of himself. Sillin wasn't ready to take out the 2 Olillo star map fragments he had yet. Now wasn't the time yet, and taking them out would only bring destruction to the entire 6th Division. As he thought, Sillin felt a little tired and slowly fell asleep. Who's talking? In a daze, 2 voices appeared in Sillin's mind. Other than the voices, Sillin also vaguely felt a familiar and strong magnetic field change, air pressure change, and a sudden change in temperature that rose more than 50 degrees in a second before falling below 0. His surroundings were dark, and he couldn't see anything. He could only hear the hazy voices, the sounds of fighting, the strange gunshots, and the strange yet familiar energy fluctuations. Suddenly, Sillin felt a heavy blow to his abdomen, shattering all the voices and sensations. Sillin abruptly opened his eyes and saw Huimao bouncing on his stomach. Letting out a long breath and wiping the sweat off his forehead, Sillin mumbled, "What the hell are you doing?" Hui stopped bouncing when it saw that Sillin had woken up. It stared at Sillin from head to toe with its round cat eyes and moved its ears a little. Then, it said with a grateful look on its face, "You were very strange just now. You looked like you were in hibernation, but your heartbeat was very fast and irregular, and you were sweating a lot. Look at you, you're wet, sticky, and dirty. You didn't respond when I called you. That's why I did it." Hearing Hui Mao's words, Silin was stunned. Hypnosis. Silin thinks laughed. He had hypnotized others so many times, but he didn't expect that he would be the one being hypnotized. If his analysis was correct, the person who hypnotized him was one of the two voices he heard at that time. As long as Silin thinks thought about what happened at that time, he would be affected by the voice and would not be able to calmly analyze what happened at that time. However, Silin was puzzled as to why that person chose to hypnotize him instead of killing him directly. It should be known that Silin did not have the slightest ability to resist at that time. Moreover, in that kind of situation, it was almost impossible for him to survive. Silin sat up and scratched Hui Mao's chin. "Thanks." Hui Mao narrowed his eyes and snorted. "You had a nightmare, right?" "I knew it. I wasn't the only one who had a nightmare." "What was your nightmare about?" Silin asked as he scratched Hui Mao's chin. At the mention of this, Hui Mao's beard trembled. "It was about fish biscuits. That day I dreamt that all the fish biscuits in my cupboard grew legs and ran away. That's why you ate them all the next day." No wonder he saw this glutton squatting there and eating a cupboard full of fish biscuits that day. The floor was covered in crumbs, and Silin had to clean it for a long time before he could get rid of the fishy smell. "I didn't have that dream again after I ate them," Hui Mao said proudly. "Proud my ass. What an idiot." Silin was utterly speechless towards this cat. "Oh right, are we still going to the planet where we discovered the special energy mine at Sector Z?" Hui Mao asked expectantly. "When we reach the edge of Sector Z, we will decide the best sailing route. If it's not on our way, then we won't go. If it's on our way, then we can go and see how the planet has been modified. I hope it's on our way. I miss the fish there. Amen. If it's on our way, then let's go and get more living creatures." While Silin and the others were sailing towards Sector Z, many people from the 4 great hunter regiments were also rushing towards Sector Z. At that time, it would be the true gathering of the 4 great hunter regiments. No one could say for sure what kind of collision would occur, but one thing was for sure. This time, it would be the most influential gathering in the entire League of Stars. Chapter 202. The God's Back Garden that the military had just opened was located at the center of Sector Z. The strange thing was that after this black hole area was lit up, the space environment of Sector Z underwent a 180-degree change. The ordinary magnetic field anomaly had also gradually stabilized, and the occasional large-scale ion storms had mostly stopped since the activation of God's Back Garden. The existence of the former black hole area was actually a form of protection for Sector Z. Sector Z was incredibly rich in resources, and while the special energy or Silin and the 6th Division might not necessarily exist on the other planets in Sector Z, there were definitely a lot of them that were of similar grade. Once Sector Z's space environment became ordinary, then it was undoubtedly a huge piece of fat meat. The League of Stars' military alone would not be able to swallow it all. This was probably one of the reasons why the military had announced all of this directly. According to the news that the League of Stars' 10 great business families represented by the Andryra family, the 4 great hunter regiments, and some other high-ranking hunter regiments and famous adventure groups had all received an invitation from the military to discuss how to split this huge cake. When the Dark Triangle was no longer the Dark Triangle, and Sector Z was developed by the various forces, the fate of Sector Z would change from then on. It was not hard to imagine that Sector Z would no longer be one of the 13 backward sectors after this incident. It would become a developed sector, and the 10 trade sectors would become the 11 trade sectors. Due to the change in Sector Z's space environment and the military's direct permission, Silin and the others' entry into Sector Z was very smooth. According to the star map, that so-called God's Back Garden is located in the triangle Sector Z, and it is at the same distance from every vertex of the triangle. Yudi explained some of the results of his calculations to the crowd. This means that this area may be artificially controlled. It would be too much of a coincidence if it's natural. Beaver said, everyone's thoughts were more or less the same. The real question was, who exactly developed this area? Who had the ability to produce such results? Carrie scratched his head. Does this mean that the lit area controls the entire Sector Z space environment? When this area was still a black hole, Sector Z space environment was so bad, but it stabilized after it was lit. I don't think so, Sillin said. The worse the environment is, the better it is for the creation of special energy ores. The fact that there are so many special energy ores, special species, and rare metals in Sector Z means that Sector Z's environment is different from other sectors. I agree with Lieutenant Sillin's opinion. Yudi switched the image on the light screen, and Sector Z's history appeared. This history may not be complete, and there are obvious traces of embellishment, but the most important thing is that Sector Z's harsh environment has always existed. Scylla knew about Olillo's incident more than 1,000 years ago, but there were records about Sector Z even earlier. At the time, Sector Z was still the famous Dark Triangle, and it was like this even before the Alliance was founded. According to the history Yudi released, there were no records about Sector Z's black hole at the time. Although it bore the name Dark Triangle, there was no explanation about the black hole at the center. Sector Z's black hole appeared more than 1,000 years ago, and it was also when Olillo appeared. Xiaoshang rubbed his chin. Sigh, do you guys think that a higher civilization had appeared there before? Otherwise, even the League of Stars wouldn't be able to achieve such a feat right now, would they? Yudi glanced sideways at him and said, We'll know if it's a higher civilization after we go there. If it's a higher civilization, we can see it clearly from the building traces there. Sillin looked carefully at the records about Sector Z on the image. It was a record from 1,000 years ago. Something's not right. Sillin pointed at the description of Sector Z. No matter how I look at it, the records are even scarier than the Sector Z we know. If that's the case, we couldn't have traveled safely at the time, and we couldn't even stay at the borders of Sector Z. Yudi nodded. I've always thought that the people of that era were exaggerating things, but looking at it now, it may be true that the records are true. It's just that the center of Sector Z had improved after it appeared, and in order to hide that area, someone had used certain methods to make Sector Z's cosmic environment turn hostile once more. But that area is real, so no matter how they try to hide it, Sector Z is no longer as hostile as it was 1,000 years ago. Something suddenly became clear in Sillin's mind. The Wonderland Olillo was talking about wasn't just that lit-up area, but the entire Sector Z. The lit-up area was admittedly the core, but that area's existence was to improve Sector Z. Once it was improved, the entire Sector Z would become a fertile land. This was a huge gift. In reality, the conclusion of Sillin's squad's discussion was more or less the same as the military's analysis. Since the military possessed more information, they were certain of this conclusion, unlike Sillin's squad who were only guessing. After a period of flight, the 3rd B Squadron and the 6th Division arrived at the coordinates given by the A Squadron at the same time. At the time, the image released by the military was blurry, and no one could see the full picture of the lit-up area clearly. But now that they saw it with their own eyes, it was truly amazing. There was a star in its prime in this area, and the planets orbiting this star each had their own unique characteristics. Among them was a giant planet with a rank A habitability. There was a satellite belt around this planet, and on these satellites were some asteroids with rank B and C habitability. However, both the satellite belt and the giant planet were guarded by the military right now. The few planets with rank C habitability and above were all under the military's control. Seeing the military forces dispatched by the League of Stars, there was no way they could keep this a secret even if they didn't announce it to the public. The most amazing thing was that there was a platform between this giant planet and the satellite belt. Yes, a man-made platform that was much bigger than the spaceport Sillin had seen before. It was obvious that this was the spaceport of this giant planet. The spaceports he had seen before were like fishing boats compared to an aircraft carrier. There were many fortress-like buildings on this platform-shaped spaceport. The buildings were surrounded by energy shields, and the military starships, fighters, and aircrafts were parked in the open areas. Under the flashing light of the energy shields and the illumination of the star, The entire spaceport flashed with a mesmerizing light. It was incomparably dazzling. Who the hell built all of this? It's too fucking cool. So I say, how cool would it be if Vanguard's spaceport was built like this? Carrie wanted to stick his face to the display screen. Although Yudi was also very surprised by this spaceport, he still mercilessly attacked Carrie's words. If Vanguard's spaceport was built like this, how much energy would it consume every day? We don't have as much capital as the military. Carrie curled his lips, but he didn't retort. That giant planet was definitely out of the question. Cheto and Hui Mao could feel the planet's domineering defense network just from its periphery. The coordinates given to them by the A Squadron were located on a Rank B habitability asteroid in the satellite belt around the largest planet. Although the planet was marked as a Rank B habitability planet, Sillin felt that the environment here was even better than the Rank B habitability planets in other sectors. If it was just a little bit better, it would reach the requirements of a Rank A habitability planet. This kind of environment was already very good for Sillin and the others. The A Squadron had built a temporary spaceport on the outskirts of the planet. Looking at the two starships parked inside the spaceport, it was obvious that some B squadrons had already arrived. They weren't the first to arrive. After parking the starships, Sillin and the others boarded a spaceplane and flew to the asteroid. Some fortresses had already been built on the asteroid. It was obvious that they were going to be stationed there for a long time. Sillin and the others below the rank of lieutenant commander were resting at their assigned places. As the captain, Schotten had already rushed over to report in. A communication network had already been built on the asteroid. Everyone had adjusted the frequency of their communicators so that it would be easier to communicate on the planet. However, Sillin had just stopped when someone informed him that a guest had come to visit. Me? Who is it? Sillin asked in puzzlement. The person in charge of notifying the guest had an odd look on his face. You'll know when you come over. The A Squadron had built a reception point on the asteroid. Inside this reception point, a certain someone was holding a cup of tea with his legs crossed and a book open on his lap. He was drinking tea and reading at the same time. Most of the people in charge of the reception point were Vanguard's A Squadron members. Of course, they hadn't reached Somba Leruo's level yet. Not every squadron member was promoted from a captain to a captain. Although the youngsters in charge of the reception point were usually a little arrogant, they restrained their arrogance in front of the person who was leisurely drinking tea. Although there was no kindness or malice in their eyes, there was a hint of admiration. A 16 or 17-year-old girl was talking to her friends about the person sitting there. Hey, did you see the emblem on his chest? One of the girl's eyes were full of stars. Another girl replied, How can I not see it? It blinded my eyes. Gentleman, knowledgeable. He doesn't look much older than us, right? He's already a 1-star academician at such a young age. A 1-star academician at the League of Stars Research Institute. What's wrong with his head? But usually, a gentleman isn't necessarily what he looks like on the inside. A gentleman is nothing more than a patient wolf. What's there to be afraid of? Patient wolf. Forget it. A few boys next to them rolled their eyes. Hey, you two be more reserved. What's there to be reserved about? The two girls sneered. It's not easy to find a satisfactory target. Yeah, do you think the child's IQ would be very high if you were to have a child like this? Last time, I heard someone say that the child's IQ is more related to the mother's. How can that be? Last time, they said that my IQ was close to that of a modern ape. Don't be afraid. In terms of combat strength, they are like eggs in the hands of a modern ape in front of you. The boys around them sweated profusely as they listened. They glanced at the person who was still sitting there reading peacefully as if he didn't hear what was going on around him. They sighed in their hearts. Such determination. Sillin walked in while the juniors and the home team were discussing. Seeing the person who looked like a senior academic sitting there reading and drinking tea, Sillin said in pleasant surprise, I didn't expect you to come. As he spoke, Sillin strode over. C.I. Jincheng, who was sitting there drinking tea, raised his eyes to look at Sillin. He elegantly put down his teacup, closed his book, and placed it beside him. Then, he stood up and gave Sillin a flying kick. The surrounding crowd The word gentleman was directly erased from everyone's minds. Sillin, who was kicked, was sent flying in a parabola. But not long after, he walked in with a chuckle and gave C.I. Jincheng a hug. Then he hammered C.I. Jincheng's shoulder and pointed at the emblem on his chest. Yo, not bad. You're an academician now. C.I. Jincheng looked at the face in front of him expressionlessly. It was just as Knight and Lung had said. Stupid no matter how I look at it. Patting the leg of his pants, C.I. Jincheng said, Aren't you going to invite me over to your place? We need to have a good talk. Of course, academician C.I., please. C.I. Jincheng suddenly paused after taking 2 steps and said, Sir M.O. has also been invited over. He's on that main planet right now. Speaking of Sir M.O., Sillin really didn't know how to face him. Although he had sent a few coded messages in between, sending messages and meeting him were 2 different things. If he met him in person, his already stupid face would probably become as stupid as a pig's head. All right, I forgot to tell you, C.I. Jincheng revealed a gloating smile. I've already told Sir Mo before I came here. I think in another, 2 hours, Sir Mo should be done with his work by then. Fuck. After Sillin and C.I. Jincheng had left, the youngsters gathered together once more. Hey, who was that guy just now? I don't know. He looked a little stupid. TSK, look at your eyesight. That's called concealment. You guys actually don't know who that guy is? He's a helicopter member who was internally selected beforehand. So you're saying that guy is at the captain level? A girl asked. I don't think so. But I heard from my father that that guy was internally selected by the higher-ups a long time ago. As long as he's willing, he can directly enter the A Squadron at any time. He's that good. Anyone who was promoted to the A Squadron from a branch team was someone with true strength. No matter what kind of background you had in the Vanguard, you had absolute strength. I really didn't expect there to be such a person in the branch. You don't know, do you? Let me tell you guys. Sillin did not know what those youngsters would say about him. Right now, he was facing C.I. Jincheng's fierce criticism. As expected of an academician-level figure of the League of Stars Research Institute. He had probably traveled to various sectors to give lectures many times already. After a series of criticism, he didn't even drink a cup of water, and it looked like he was going to continue. Hui Mao stared at C.I. Jincheng on a cabinet not far away with a pair of round eyes. Was that the researcher Sillin was talking about? Although Sillin said that this was a good researcher, but were there good researchers in the League of Stars? That being said, watching Sillin get scolded was a very satisfying thing. While C.I. Jincheng was listing out the troublesome things that had happened during the years when Sillin played dead, Sillin's communicator rang again. M.O. hung. Old M.O. had arrived. Sillin did not need to go to the reception area to pick him up. Old M.O. had volunteered to come personally, and with Old Mo's status, naturally he would be accompanied. Sillin's face twitched. It would be fine if they came one by one, but he would probably drown in their saliva if they piled up together. Hearing that Old M.O. was coming over, C.I. Jincheng stopped talking. He picked up his tea, took a sip, crossed his legs, and put on an expression that said good luck. People like Sillin who understood Old Mo's temper knew that the old man could put on airs and be amiable normally. But in the words of Seven Lights Vice Headmaster and Ting, he was a senior academic ruffian. Speaking of which, Old M.O. had already thought things through when he received the military's invitation. There is no doubt that the newly opened God's Back Garden was attractive, but at the same time, he also knew that various major forces had also been invited, and all of them had mobilized a lot of manpower. That little bastard disciple of his would probably be among them. That was why Old M.O. had arrived very early. At the time, Vanguard's B squadrons had not arrived yet. The old man took a general look at the newly opened area, and just as he had analyzed earlier, it was not built by a higher civilization. While he was arranging everything, he received C.I. Jincheng's message. He could not sit still the moment he heard that the 6th Division had arrived. He was planning to supervise the current project to completion, but his hands just couldn't stop itching. Since he could not calm down and supervise the project, he let another engineering scholar take over and sent him to the little planet where Vanguard was located. Now that Old M.O. had arrived, the ones to receive him were definitely not the juniors. The A Squadron had specifically sent someone over, and the one to receive old M.O. was one of Vanguard's high-ranking officials, Suli. Suali's status and influence in Vanguard was much greater than Sombalero and Bart's. The fact that this high-ranking official showed up in person immediately shocked the youngsters at the reception point. They really did not expect that an important figure like Suali would personally come to visit them. Suali and old M.O. could be considered old acquaintances. He sighed about the things that had happened over the years as he walked towards the 6th Division. Along the way, he ran into Bart and Sombalero, who had just returned from a mining planet. After exchanging greetings, the duo did not linger and headed straight for the 6th Division's temporary base. "What's going on? Why is that old man here?" Bart said while stroking his long beard. Sombalero did not answer. The corner of his lips curled meaningfully, and he turned around to continue walking. Over at the 6th Division's temporary base, Sillin was rubbing his face thoughtfully when he suddenly heard a loud roar from outside. "Get your ass over here, Sillin." Chapter 203. M.O. Hang's roar immediately aroused the curiosity of the 6th Division and the 3rd B Squadron, who were resting in the neighboring building. They stretched their necks and looked over, and some of them even secretly adjusted their surveillance cameras and watched from inside the house. A few of the lieutenant commanders recognized Suali, so they were even more puzzled. Just what kind of person could make Suali accompany him so patiently? Behind Sir M.O. were 2 people from the military, and there was also a team of guards at the reception point. The lowest rank of these guards was a major, and they were all here to protect M.O. Hung. The 2 people following M.O. Hung were both major generals. It was clear how influential M.O. Hung was in the military. However, Sully was the only one who knew about this. The people of the 6th and 3rd B Squadrons did not know about this. None of the people protecting M.O. Hung were wearing military uniforms or badges, but it was obvious from their movements that they were from the military. It was just that they did not know their ranks. Hearing M.O. Hang's voice, Sillin hurriedly walked out. It had been a few years since they last met, and to be honest, he missed the old man a lot. He had only seen Sir Mo's image in a few electronic magazines with high contribution points, but that was the side Sir M.O. wanted others to see. The other side was only known to those close to him. For example, right now, when M.O. Hung saw Sillin walking out, he examined him from head to toe. Before this, M.O. Hung had seen Sillin's current appearance, but after seeing it in person, he still couldn't help but sigh. Look at this kid's stupid face. Since there were a lot of people watching, Sir M.O. was merciful enough to not make a move. "Let's talk inside." M.O. Hung put his hands behind his back and walked straight inside with a straight face. "After you." Sillin let out a sigh of relief. If M.O. Hung were to pull his face right now, Sillin's prestige would probably drop to 0. The fact that he was pulling a straight face proved that M.O. Hung wasn't really angry right now. On the contrary, Sir M.O. must be plotting something. This was what Sillin guessed based on his understanding of M.O. Hung. As expected, the moment he entered, M.O. Hang's hand reached out from behind his back and grabbed Sillin's face. Squatting on a tall cabinet not far away, Hui Mao's mouth was wide open. Oh my, this old man is even crueler than C.I. He actually pinched his face. The faces of the 2 major generals behind M.O. Hung twitched. Old Master Mo's old habits were acting up again. They had seen with their own eyes how Elder M.O. had pinched the face of their boss, the famous general of the League of Stars, until it was red. Suali, who had followed them in, looked at the master and disciple pair with great interest. He had only heard a few things about Sillin from Bart, Nada, and Sombalero. Even Ji Feng had praised Sillin, so he couldn't tell much about Sillin at such a close distance. "You're really heartless, aren't you?" Yes. If you say so, then it must be." Elder M.O. continued to reprimand Sillin until he was done. Seeing the red marks on Sillin's face, even Suali and the 2 generals felt pain in their balls and faces. Then, as expected, there was a barrage of criticism and reprimand. He had finally said all the words he had been holding back for so long, and he had scolded everything that needed to be scolded. He beckoned with his hand, and a major general carefully brought over the box he was carrying and a spherical instrument. The moment he saw this, Sillin knew that Mo Hung was going to check his homework. Sillin hadn't used the instrument to measure the overall accuracy for years, but it shouldn't be lower, right? Sillin brought Mo Hung to a temporary workshop, and C.I. Jin Cheng came over to join the fun. Hui Mao wouldn't miss this opportunity either. Cheto, who was in the next room, didn't need to go over to watch. He could know what was going on inside through the surveillance network and the monitors in the workshop. Also, he was responsible for destroying the recording after this incident. It was Sillin's order, and Mo Hung carried the box over and put it on the table. Then, he carefully took out a pile of parts inside. They were all finer parts. He pressed a button on the circular instrument, and it floated up to reveal a scanning hole in Sillin's direction. At the same time, a light screen popped up on top of the prototype, displaying some basic test data. Even Sual Li was a little surprised when he saw the data. It wasn't a lot of parts, but there were almost 100,000 of them. Needless to say, Sillin began to move after he pushed aside the parts and took a look. A major general brought over a chair and let Mo Hung sit down. Then, everyone's eyes were subconsciously drawn to Sillin's movements. Every time Mo Hung watched Sillin assemble, it was like he was admiring a rare work of art. Mo Hung had used one of Sillin's assembling videos as a teaching example, but it was more of a deterrent than a guide. After all, there were too few people who could do what Sillin did, and not even some of the great instructors in Seven Lights could do it. After Sillin had left, every Seven Lights student who had seen the assembling video tried to inquire about the person who did it, but all the instructors who knew the inside story shut their mouths at the same time and said that it was someone related to Mo Hung. Until now, the video was hailed as a classic by the students of Seven Lights. Mo Hung knew from experience that Sillin had definitely improved without even looking at the instrument. He would know the answer he wanted as long as he moved his eyes away to look at the data on the light screen of the instrument. But Mo Hung could not bear to move his eyes away. It was undeniable that watching Sillin assemble was a pleasure in itself. Unlike the sense of urgency some so-called senior engineers and technicians had when they were assembling, Sillin's movements looked very comfortable to the eyes. It was as natural as breathing. However, in reality, Sillin's movements were very fast, so fast that it was easy to overlook some of his movements. Even so, it didn't affect the smoothness of his movements at all. Different people, different levels of strength, and different angles of view would more or less miss some of his movements. But all of them were slowly attracted by Sillin's hand movements without any prior agreement. At this time, no one in the audience would think about how this person was able to distinguish the order in which the parts were assembled, or why this person knew what parts to assemble without looking at the fitting parts. The audience's mind was actually very empty. As Sillin's hands moved, the thoughts in their minds were unconsciously emptied out, and the only thing left in the empty world of their minds was an object that was slowly taking shape. 10 minutes later, a finger-thick, half-meter-long mechanical snake was assembled. The two major generals immediately shuddered. They had actually been distracted just now. If someone had tried to harm Mo Hung during this period of time, they would not have had the time to react at all. People like them who had gone through strict training and experienced countless battlefields actually had their thoughts emptied out, although part of the reason was because they believed that Sillin would not harm Sir Mo. As guards, they had still underestimated Sillin. In the face of a person like Sillin, even the slightest bit of negligence could put them in a passive position. Now, they finally knew why Sillin had entered the A-rank list of the military secret files. The people around Mo Hung would certainly do some research on Sillin. With their status in the military and the secret information provided by General Mo Qing, they naturally knew a lot of things that others did not know, especially about Sillin. At this time, they even wondered how long it would take for Sillin to enter the S-rank list. The assembled mechanical snake did not look like a mechanical snake at all. The special materials and precise assembly made the little snake look no different from a real one. It nimbly circled around Sillin's arm, raised its flat triangular head to look at Mo Hung and the others, and flicked out its tongue. Mo Hung swallowed. When Sillin's hands stopped moving, his mind was no longer on the little snake. He did not need a detector to test the snake's qualification. He could absolutely confirm that it was a high-rank qualification. Mo Hung, tilted his head to look at the data displayed on the holographic screen. One of the columns showed a series of numbers. The first few times, the comprehensive accuracy reached the theoretical value of 99. 98%, but after 3 steps, it reached 99. 99%, and it had maintained this data since then. Mo Heng's old face was flushed with excitement. His mouth trembled, but he could not say a word. After taking a deep breath, he completely forgot to exhale. Master, take a deep breath, take a deep breath. Don't forget to exhale. Silin hurriedly reminded Mo Heng. Mo Heng stood up abruptly. You. Mo Heng directly grabbed Silin's face. After saying you for a long time, he still could not say you. His breathing quickened, causing the 2 major generals and Suo Li to be afraid that something had happened to the old man. Master, breathe. Take a deep breath. Breathe slowly. Silin said. Slow my ass. Mo Heng almost roared. The corner of Suo Li's mouth twitched. This was the behavior of a dignified 4-star academician. After Mo Heng let go of Silin's face, he spun around in circles. Seeing this, Silin and the others were puzzled. What was wrong with the old man? While Silin was thinking, Mo Heng suddenly paused and pointed at Silin. You're coming with me to that planet in a moment. There's a mission. No one could dissuade Old Man Mo's words, so the 2 major generals did not try to dissuade him at all. Now, that Mo Heng wanted to bring Silin to that planet, he would definitely need the approval and permission of some people in the military. Old Man Mo would naturally contact the relevant personnel for those matters. They only needed to protect Old Man Mo Heng was a man of action. After making the decision, he had Silin pack up his things and bring along any handy tools. Of course, this handy tool referred to tools related to assembly, not dangerous items such as firearms. After that, Mo Heng took out his communicator and started contacting people. Suo Li was dumbfounded by the sudden turn of events. He wasn't a member of that circle, and he didn't know what the theoretical 99% comprehensive accuracy meant. He might know a little, but he didn't know what it meant to people like Mo Heng, so he couldn't understand Mo Heng's feelings right now. While Silin was packing up his tools, he sent a secret signal to Cheto. Cheto's eyes flashed for a moment before he deleted everything that happened in the workshop just now. He had been paying close attention to the monitor all this time. Although the video had been deleted, the scene of Silin assembling still existed in Cheto's memory bank. Unless he forcibly deleted it, the memory would always be there. At the same time, Cheto's eyes turned very subtle, and his fingers moved slightly. If Silin was here, he would have noticed that his fingers were moving at the exact same frequency as when he was assembling just now. The only difference was that Cheto's movements weren't as big. It didn't take long for Mo Heng to finish contacting people. Then he nodded at Silin and said, "Let's go." Suo Li was familiar with Mo Heng's personality, so he didn't mind Mo Heng's disregard. He shot Silin a look and said, "Pay attention. Contact me if you need anything." Silin nodded and left. C.I. Jinsheng was one of the invited members of the League of Stars Research Institute, so he left with them. Hui Mao and Cheto didn't go with them. Setting aside whether or not the military would allow people like them to enter a planet like this, if they exposed themselves in front of the League of Stars Research Institute's academicians, it would be hard for them to get away. After all, their characteristics were too special. Mo Heng told Silin about the so-called mission while he was taking Silin to the planet. The academicians of the League of Stars Research Institute who were invited this time were people who had made contributions and influence in different fields. Right now, they were all conducting research in different places and regions. There were a total of 16 engineers like Mo Heng, and right now, they were working on a machine the size of a small mountain. Due to their age, some of the senior academicians who were invited couldn't do everything by themselves. They had to take a break after a while, and during this break, they would supervise and guide the work. The people they brought with them were all their favorite students, and they would guide them while they were working on the huge machine. However, Mo Heng didn't bring any students with him when he came to this planet, so he couldn't avoid the criticism of his old enemies. That was why Mo Heng gave Sillin a good scolding when he saw him and vented his grievances. However, Mo Hang's arrogance when he got off the space plane surprised a few of his old colleagues. Sillin was following beside Mo Hung while carrying a toolbox that wasn't fancy at all. His presence was low, and he looked pretty ordinary. He looked like an errand boy. But everyone who knew Mo Hung knew that he wouldn't let an ordinary errand boy follow him. The people who helped Mo Hung with the toolbox were all major generals. Mo Hung slowly walked over with his hands behind his back and stood with a few old academicians. He looked at the huge machine and nodded. Sillin, go ahead. Sillin's stomach hurt when he heard this. Why did it sound like close the door and let the dogs go? A few old academicians who were resting next to him looked over in surprise. An old man who was also a 4-star academician thumped his leg and shouted, "Old ruffian Mo, who is this guy? You know, we can't let unrelated people in here." Those who could come in were, of course, approved, so they were definitely not unrelated people. The old man said this just to stop Mo Hung, and everyone understood this. Mo Hung didn't put on a straight face like before. Instead, he pretended to be calm and said, "This guy is old and can't move anymore. Let my disciple do it for him." These words surprised the old academicians. It was still the old man who asked first, "Old ruffian Mo, when did you have a disciple?" Mo Hung looked up at the sky. "I've had a disciple for a long time." Hearing old man Mo's proud sigh and trying to pretend to be bitter, Sillin's hand that was holding the box trembled. "Look at him. It's as if having a disciple has been through the vicissitudes of life." The old academicians curled their lips and continued to pretend. For Mo Hung, this disciple who appeared in front of these leading academicians for the first time, the old academicians diverted part of their attention. Not only was Mo Hang's disciple mysterious, but he was also too young. So young that they couldn't trust his ability. After Sillin walked over, he didn't do anything immediately. He put down the box and walked around the huge machine, attracting the attention of the old academician's disciples who were busy working. Seeing that his disciple was paying attention to old ruffian Mo's disciple, an old academician's face immediately darkened, and he shouted, "Focus on your own work. Why are you paying attention to others?" Mo Hang's eyes narrowed. "Sigh. Some people are just born to attract attention." The other old academicians who were sitting there resting decided to directly filter out Mo Hang's words and didn't pay much attention to Sillin. In any case, if he couldn't do anything, it would be a slap in the face for Mo Hung. Reality proved everything. Let's see how long that old ruffian can be smug for. Ignoring what the others thought, Sillin walked around the huge hemispherical machine and thought for a while with a frown. Huimao once said that machines also had their own language, and the information they wanted to express could be understood by listening. This big machine was huge, complicated, and could even block scanners. Without understanding the principle and general structure, no one dared to work on it. So until now, there had been no substantial progress, even with more than a dozen academicians personally working on it. They might be experienced in assembly, but when it came to the language of machines, they couldn't compare to Sillin, so they wouldn't think in that direction. He carefully sensed the subtle movements caused by non-human activities in the surroundings. There weren't even any plants around, so the subtle movements should be caused by this huge machine. After being further stimulated by the chip, Sillin's ability to listen to machine language had improved a lot. As his thoughts slowly settled, he could listen to some intermittent language. Sillin converted these languages into shapes in his mind. And so, in Sillin's mind, the big machine was surrounded by floating shapes from time to time. From the floating and moving trajectories of these shapes, Sillin came to one of the parts of the machine. The spot Sillin was looking for was nearly 10 meters above the ground. Activating his hoverboard, Sillin flew to the spot and pressed down. "Hey kid, don't touch it," roared an old academician in exasperation. Impatient. Young people are too impatient. Mo Hung didn't care. Being too impatient would only ruin things. He still needed to hone his skills. However, as soon as the old academician finished speaking, the huge, motionless, hemispherical machine split into a few petals like a flower and spread out from the point at the top. Mo Hung slapped his thigh excitedly. Hey, look, it moved. The old academicians rolled their eyes at the same time. Anyone with eyes would know that it was time to move. However, they had to admit that Mo Hang's mysterious disciple was indeed capable. Whether it was by coincidence or not, he did touch a key spot. This was as exciting as opening a shortcut in a maze. However, looking back at Mo Hung, the old academicians really wanted to remind this arrogant academic ruffian, Mo, watch out for your arrogant tail.